The cultivation world of the heavenly south region was in an uproar once again. Aside from those who were already aware of Han Li's relationship with Nangongwan, all of the nascent soul cultivators who received the invitation were extremely surprised. However, with Han Li's current resounding reputation, no one dared to turn down his invitation. The three other great cultivators of the heavenly south region were unable to attend in person to the fact that they were all in seclusion, but they sent their disciples to offer precious congratulatory presents. It was said in the few days leading up to the commencement of the ceremony, the entire sky above the Dreamcloud Mountains had been enshrouded under extremely exuberant five-colored light. Intricate buildings of light also appeared out of thin air on the mountains, and under the effect of the restriction, all of the plants on the entire mountain ranges were in full bloom, making the Dreamcloud Mountains appear as it were an ethereal, immortal realm. The three sects on the Dreamcloud Mountains, as well as some nearby smaller sects that were trying to suck up to Han Li, had worked tirelessly to prepare for this ceremony, making it an even grander and more illustrious occasion than the celebration ceremony held when Han Li became a great cultivator. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D680, letter 1D604, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D560, letter 1D426. Aside from the cultivators of the major sects who had received invitations from the Drifting Cloud sect, some cultivators from other smaller sects, as well as many renowned vagrant cultivators, attended the ceremony, offering presents of their own. During the few days when the ceremony was held, around 5,000 to 6,000 cultivators outside of the Dreamcloud Mountains flocked to the scene, most of whom were high-grade cultivators. It was the most spectacular ceremony held in the heavenly south region for the past 1,000 years. However, that was no surprise. Back when Han Li had become a great cultivator, many people had attended the celebratory ceremony to congratulate him, but most of them harbored doubts in their hearts about the authenticity of his claim. Furthermore, there were still three other great cultivators in the heavenly south region as well. However, following the sparring match held during that celebratory ceremony, Han Li had well and truly cemented himself as the #1 cultivator of the heavenly south region. It was said that Han Li could face two great cultivators at once and still easily gain the upper hand, and this was quite a harrowing notion to all of the sects in the heavenly south region. This indicated that if Han Li didn't have to worry about his own sect, he was powerful enough on his own to steamroll any cultivation sect in the entire region. No sect in the heavenly south region could possess more than two great cultivators among their ranks, so there was no power in the entire region that could contend with Han Li. As such, regardless of whether these sects had ties with the Drifting Cloud sect or not in the past, all of them had sent people to the ceremony in an attempt to establish better relations with Han Li's sect. As for the high-grade vagrant cultivators, they wanted to make the acquaintance of this #1 cultivator in the heavenly south region, hoping that Han Li would be kind enough to offer them some guidance in their cultivation. As such, countless cultivators had arrived to attend the ceremony from the three sects, as well as outside of the Dreamcloud Mountains, making it truly a ceremony for the ages. Han Li and Nangongwan didn't appear at the ceremony for a very long time. The two of them merely delivered a grateful address to all of the cultivators gathered at the ceremony, then engaged in a formal exchange of cups of wine between bride and groom before departing from the scene. Everything else thereafter was obviously left to Luluo, and he rose to the occasion. Even though the two stars of the show weren't present, he was still able to make the rest of the ceremony an extremely lively and bustling occasion. The ceremony lasted a total of 3 to 4 days before finally drawing to the conclusion. Most of the cultivators who had arrived to offer their congratulations began to depart, but there were a few among them who refrained from leaving. Han Li and a white-robed Nangongwan stood side by side on the summit of the main peak of the interconnected peaks. Neither of them said anything, but their silence was more meaningful than 1,000 words. After a long while, Nangongwan tucked a few stray strands of hair behind her ear before turning to Han Li with a gorgeous smile. Looks like every cloud really does have a silver lining. Through cultivating the youthful celestial moon, I was finally able to progress to the mid-nascent soul stage. Of course, I have to thank you for your assistance as well. The imperial elixir that you fed me saved me at least a dozen years of arduous cultivation. Without it, I could still be trapped in that seal. Speaking of progression, I'm very surprised that you were able to reach the late nascent soul stage so quickly. With your current powers, you'll be invincible in the human world as long as you don't encounter those few deity transformation old monsters, right? Invincible? I wouldn't dare to say that. Perhaps there exists another nascent soul cultivator in the human world who stands above me. Han Li gave a modest smile in response. I don't believe that. What came as quite a surprise to me was just how insidious this soul seal curse was. I thought that the power within the inner core of the ancient flame toad would be able to lift this curse, but who would have thought that there were a few additional restrictions lying dormant within my body this entire time? Thank heavens the true method to lift the curse was used in advance. Otherwise, I would have been in deep trouble. Nangongwan's eyes were shimmering with a seductive light. Han Li turned to Nangongwan with a smile and replied, "That was also a massive load taken off my shoulders. It appears that my trip to the Great Jinn was worth it. After this, you should take the nascent cultivating pill I gave you last time. With the assistance of that pill, it might be possible for you to progress to the late nascent soul stage as well." Is that nascent cultivating pill really that miraculous? It can even assist in a breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage. Nangongwan seemed to be a little skeptical. Quite a few mid-nascent soul cultivators in the Great Jinn perished for this pill. Do you think they would give their lives for a hoax? Han Li replied with a chuckle. All right, then after I fortify my mid-nascent soul stage cultivation base, I'll take the pill and attempt another breakthrough. Nangongwan pursed her lips in a faint smile as a seductive yet exuberant light danced in her eyes. Han Li looked at his Dao companion's exquisite features, then thought back to the intimacy they had shared during the past few days, and a scorching impulse suddenly welled up in the pit of his stomach. Just as he was about to say something, his expression suddenly changed as he turned and cast his gaze toward the distant sky. Nangongwan faltered slightly before also turning her attention toward the same direction. A few moments later, a streak of white light broke through the restriction in the distance before flying directly toward Han Li's duo. Han Li's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise, seemingly having already identified who their visitor was. The streak of white light circled around in the sky before descending onto the ground. The light then receded to reveal a gorgeous woman. It was none other than Mu Paling. Mu Paling pays her respects to her lord and big sister Nangong. Mu Paling extended a respectful salute toward the two of them. Little sister Paling, why have you come here from the sect in such a hurry even though the ceremony is already over? Could it be that there's something senior martial brother Lu couldn't take care of, so he's requesting our assistance? Nangongwan asked. Big sister Nangong, there are some guests who still haven't left following the conclusion of the ceremony. All of them proclaim that they're acquaintances of my lord and wish to see him. Senior martial brother Lu was unsure of whether my lord would like to entertain these guests, so he sent me here as a messenger. If my lord doesn't wish to see them, then he'll ask them to leave, Mu Paling explained. Acquaintances of yours, could they perhaps be a group of beautiful female cultivators? Nangongwan took a glance at Han Li with an amused smile on her face. Mu Paling cast a surreptitious glance toward Han Li before biting down on her lower lip as she nodded. Indeed, big sister Nangong, the guests in question are all female. Oh, looks like your former lovers have come to find you. Nangongwan rolled her eyes at Han Li. Former lovers? Please don't make such jokes, Wanner. Paling, have you asked those guests for their names? Han Li cleared his throat with a rather awkward look before turning to Mu Paling with an inquisitive glance. I have. One of them is a woman ghost spirit sect with the surname of Yan, and she's being accompanied by 2 ghost spirit sect elders. The other 2 are a female cultivator from the controlling spirit sect by the name of Han Yunjai and Dong Xuaner from the harmonious bond sect, Mu Paling replied. It's them, Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this. Nangongwan raised an eyebrow as she chuckled. Looks like they really are acquaintances of yours. You should go and meet them. It'd be rude to keep them waiting for too long. Han Li paused for a moment before nodding as he instructed. These are all acquaintances from well before I reached the nascent soul stage, and I wouldn't mind meeting them. Paling, go and inform senior martial brother Lu that I'll be there soon. In the meantime, get them to wait for me in 2 different guest pavilions, and I'll meet them separately. Yes, I'll be taking my leave then. Mu Paling extended a respectful bow before flying away as a streak of white light. Meanwhile, Han Li looked on at her departing figure, and his brows furrowed slightly. Nangongwan noticed the minute changes in Han Li's expression, and she smiled as she asked, "Why the long face? Are you displeased with little sister Paling?" Han Li clasped his hands behind his back as he shook his head, and said, "No, it's just that I don't really understand why you decided to accept her as your sister. I originally intended for her to become your disciple. What's wrong with having Paling as a sister? I only want to pursue the great Tao with you, so I'm not interested in taking any disciples. Also, her past is kind of similar to mine, and I quite like her. Instead of placing her in the awkward position of being my disciple, I thought it was a much better idea to make her my sister instead. That way, regardless of whether you want to make her your concubine or your disciple in the future, no one will be able to say anything about it, Nangongwan explained in a warm manner. We'll do as you say then. I'm going to go and see my visitors now, Han Li replied nonchalantly. Come back soon. I'll be waiting for you in my cave abode, Nangongwan said with a faint smile. A wry smile appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. Wanner, the youthful celestial moon you're cultivating sure is quite interesting in that the power of the yin moon is required to cultivate it. In that case, a special formation will need to be set up in order to gather this power. However, the power of the yin moon is very detrimental to other cultivators, so no one can cultivate around you. It's a real pity that I'm unable to cultivate in the same cave abode as you because of this. At the time I was drawn to the power of this cultivation art, and I didn't anticipate that it would be so troublesome, Nangongwan replied with an apologetic expression. I'm just a little disappointed, but thankfully, we only have to be apart when we're cultivating. Besides, our two cave abodes are really close anyway, so we can share a cave abode whenever we're not cultivating. It really doesn't make much of a difference. All right, I'll have to go and entertain my guests now. I'll be back soon. Han Li offered some words of consolation before flying away from the main peak as a streak of azure light. Yu Paling was standing outside one of the dozen or so guest pavilions within the drifting cloud sect, and she would occasionally glance up into the distant sky. All of a sudden, azure light flashed from afar before flying through the air, descending before this pavilion in the blink of an eye. As soon Han Li arrived in front of the pavilion, Mu Paling made her way over to him and whispered, Mu Paling pays her respects to her lord. The ghost spirit sect cultivators are current resting within the pavilion, and the other two women are in that building over there. Han Li glanced at the pavilion behind Mu Paling, then at another nearby building, and he nodded with a calm expression as he said, All right, you can go now. Mu Paling extended a respectful curtsy, before flying away as a streak of white light. Han Li's body swayed, and he appeared at the entrance to the pavilion. He swept his spiritual sense through the interior of the building before walking in an unhurried manner. Within the hall on the first floor of the pavilion, there were two men and a woman sitting together while discussing something. One of the men was a stickly thin yellow-robed man, while the other was an elderly man with abnormally pale features. Their female counterpart was a beautiful young woman who appeared to be around 20 years of age. She was none other than Yan Yanner. The three of them were currently locked in a heated discussion, and the urgency in their eyes was quite apparent. As Han Li stepped into the hall, all three of them immediately turned to him in unison. They then rose to their feet with expressions of surprise and elation to welcome Han Li. Before the three of them had a chance to say anything, Han Li abruptly appeared on a wooden chair across from them. He waved a nonchalant hand and said, There's no need for formalities, fellow Taoists. Let's all take a seat. None of the three were able to identify how he had approached them so quickly. The elderly man's heart jolted upon seeing this, but he quickly put on a smile as he nodded in response. Thus, the three of them sat down again. Han Li examined the young woman who had become even more beautiful since their last encounter, and a smile appeared on his face as he said, Long time no see, Fairy Yan. You've finally reached the nascent soul stage. We'll be able to refer to one another as equals now. This woman was none other than the #1 female cultivator among the younger generation in the state of Yue. She had also successfully reached the nascent soul stage. Thank you for your kind words, fellow Taoist Han. I've only recently reached the nascent soul stage, yet you're already the #1 cultivator in the heavenly south region. How can I possibly compare to you? I've come here with a request for your help, Brother Han. Yan Yanner examined Han Li carefully as a complex expression appeared on her beautiful features. Han Li smiled, yet gave no reply. He cast his gaze toward the other two ghost spirit sect elders, and his eyes rested on the face of the elderly man in the end. This fellow Taoist is Elder Zhang, right? I recall seeing you once from afar in the Devil Fall Valley. I didn't think that Brother Han would still remember someone like me. I'm very flattered. The elderly man gave a slightly awkward chuckle upon hearing this. The ghost spirit sect seems to be in a very perilous situation at the moment. All three of you are important figures in the sect, so why have you come all this way to meet me rather than remain in the state of Yue to protect the sect? Han Li cut straight to the time. Upon seeing Han Li's no-nonsense approach, Yan Yanner and the others looked at one another with hesitant expressions, as if they were unsure of how to proceed. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly, as a hint of displeasure appeared on his face. Han Li's attention naturally didn't escape the notice of the trio, and the hearts of the two men jolted as they turned toward Yan Yanner in unison. Yan Yanner hesitated momentarily before breaking the tense silence. "Fellow Taoist Han, we've come here to request assistance from your sect, no, from yourself. We hope that you can assist our ghost spirit sect during this time of crisis. Otherwise, our sect will most likely cease to exist in the near future. You want me to lend you my assistance?" Han Li raised his eyebrows as a hint of a deriding sneer appeared on his face. "I know that our sect has wronged you in the past, Brother Han, but sect leader Wang was the one who was solely responsible for that incident, and he passed away in the Devil Fall Valley long ago. The ghost spirit sect is not being ruled over by the Wang family anymore," the yellow-robed man hurriedly explained. "Is that so? I seem to have heard that Wang Chan is still thriving at your sect. Is that correct?" Han Li asked expressionlessly. Expressions of both the elderly man and Yan Yanner changed slightly upon seeing this. The yellow-robed man was also quite surprised that Han Li was aware of this detail, but he still maintained his smile as he replied, "Rest assured, Brother Han. Martial nephew Wang Chan made a huge mistake a while ago, so he's been stripped of his role as an enforcement elder, and he's currently been held in our sect's repentance cave to repent over his mistakes. He won't be released from there for at least another 100 years. Repenting over his mistakes. I don't think I've seen you before, but you seem to bear a resemblance to Fairy Yan. May I ask for your name, fellow Taoist?" Han Li was slightly surprised to hear this, but he cast his gaze toward Yan Yanner, then back at the yellow-robed man, and a thought seemed to have occurred to him as a faint smile appeared on his face. The yellow-robed man hesitated momentarily before replying truthfully, "You really do have a good eye, Brother Han. I'm also from the Yan family. I'm one of Yanner's uncles." Yan Yanner also nodded to confirm this notion. Han Li stroked his chin and asked in a meaningful voice, "Oh, so the Yan family has two nascent soul cultivators now. In that case, the Yan family must be ruling over the ghost spirit sect at present, right?" The yellow-robed man glanced at Elder Zhang before replying hesitantly, "He, it's not incorrect to say that, but that duty has only fallen to our Yan family upon Senior Martial Brother Zhang's insistence. Senior Martial Brother Wang and the others were clearly unfit to rule over the sect, so it's only natural that the Yan family should rise to the occasion," the elderly man said with a wry smile. "Oh, is that so?" Han Li said in an absent-minded manner before he fell silent, and his eyes narrowed in contemplation. The three cultivators from the ghost spirit sect didn't dare to rush Han Li, so they could only sit in silence. Yan Yanner seemed to be contemplating something as well, while the two men were feeling extremely uneasy. Han Li was currently the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, and he had once had a vendetta against their ghost spirit sect. The circumstances had changed since then, so it was very unlikely that Han Li would seek revenge against them, but they would definitely be lying if they said they weren't concerned in the slightest about being in Han Li's presence. If it weren't for the fact that the ghost spirit sect had truly reached the end of the road, they wouldn't have mustered up the courage to visit the Drifting Cloud sect. The only person in the entire Heavenly South region capable of saving them was Han Li. Their enemies were wary of the other great cultivators as well, but there was certainly no one more powerful and intimidating than Han Li in the Heavenly South region. "Even if those past events had never taken place, what makes you think that I'll help your ghost spirit sect?" Han Li asked in a slightly cold voice. Yan Yanner immediately turned to Han Li upon hearing this, while the two men with her were ecstatic. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D6 9B, letter 1D5 5 6, letter 1D6 80, letter 1D5 6 8, letter 1D5 F2, letter 1D4 1C, letter 1D5 FC, letter 1D5 FA. The three of them could all hear a hint of possibility in Han Li's voice. The yellow-robed man took a deep breath before replying, "Brother Han, if you're willing to help our sect, our ghost spirit sect will vacate the state of UA and leave it to the other sects. All we want now is to ensure the survival of our sect. In return for your assistance, we've brought along a few presents. We hope that they would be of interest to you, Brother Han." He then patted the storage pouch hanging from his waist, and a burst of white light radiated from within. Spiritual light swept toward the table before him, and 3 items appeared on the tabletop. Han Li examined the 3 items with an indifferent expression to find that they were a crimson bracelet, a porcelain vial, and a green wooden box. Han Li raised his hand and feigned a grabbing motion, upon which the three items flew through the air and landed in his grasp. At this moment, Yanyaner's pleasant voice suddenly sounded. The porcelain vial contains the sacred medicine of our sect, the blood limb pill. The pill has no other effect aside from its incredible ability to replace lost limbs. Even if a limb is completely dismembered, an identical one can be regrown after taking these pills. Due to the fact that the medicinal ingredients for these pills are very difficult to find, our sect only has around a dozen of these pills, and 3 of them are in that vial. The red bracelet is a lesser-known devilish treasure, and was something that was carried by all the past sect leaders. However, the treasure was withdrawn by Elder Zhang after sect leader Wang perished in the Devil Fall Valley. This devilish treasure is quite unique in that it's unable to directly attack the enemy, but you can nurture things like yin spirits and blood ghosts within the bracelet. Those beings can become more powerful at a rapid rate through the help of the blood chi absorbed by this bracelet, then be released to assist you in battle. As for the item in this wooden box, it's the most precious among the 3 treasures here. At this point, Yan Yanner paused and looked at Han Li with a peculiar gleam in her eyes. However, Han Li's expression remained completely unchanged, seemingly entirely disinterested in the 2 treasures placed before him. Yan Yanner heaved a faint internal sigh, but she maintained a calm expression as she continued. I heard that you're using a wood attribute cultivation art, Brother Han. The item in this box is a legendary wood spirit bead, one of the 5 elemental spirit gathering beads. Han Li's expressionless facade immediately crumbled as he exclaimed, Spirit gathering bead. You're referring to the treasures that absorb a certain type of 5 elemental spiritual chi while also repelling other types of spiritual chi. That's right. The spirit gathering bead has a very similar name to the basic spirit gathering formation, and both of them serve a similar purpose. However, I trust that Brother Han is aware of the differences in their efficacy, so I won't elaborate on that subject. As for how this item compares with spirit well objects, as long as the cultivation art you're using is of the same attribute as this spirit gathering bead, normal spirit well objects won't even be able to hold a candle to this bead, Yan Yanner said in a slow voice. Han Li's lingered on the green wooden box for a while longer, but there was a yellow restriction talisman plastered over it, so he wasn't able to glean its contents. All of a sudden, he opened his mouth and gently exhaled toward the wooden box. A burst of azure light immediately swept over the surface of the box, and the restriction talisman was detached. At the same time, his hand shot forth like lightning, pointing a finger directly at the lid of the box. The wooden lid flew off of its own accord. The faint fragrance of grass and wood immediately wafted toward Han Li. The interior of the wooden box was filled with shimmering green light, and there was a thumb-sized green bead that was sitting in the box amid the light. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward it to find that the bead wasn't made of stone nor wood, and he couldn't identify what kind of material this was. As soon as the bead was revealed, rich wood attribute spiritual chi immediately filled the surrounding area. After taking a deep breath, Han Li felt as if he had been completely reinvigorated. Han Li picked up the bead between his fingers and stared at it for a while before turning to Yan Yanner with a calm expression. This is indeed a spirit gathering bead. Some of these beads appeared during ancient times, and it's unknown whether they were naturally forming treasures or artificially refined. It's been a long time since one of these has appeared in the cultivation world. I didn't think your sect would have one. Fair Yan, is your ghost spirit sect really willing to give me such a valuable treasure? If a cultivator using a wood attribute cultivation art were to carry this bead during their cultivation, they would be able to cultivate more than twice as fast as a normal cultivator. This bead is indeed an extremely rare treasure in the human world, but our sect is still more important to us in comparison. Furthermore, as I'm sure you're aware already, Brother Han, our ghost spirit sect barely has any wood attribute cultivation arts, so this treasure is not very useful to our sect. As such, it's much wiser for us to offer it up in exchange for a chance at survival, Yan Yanner replied with a serious expression. This spirit gathering bead is indeed very useful to me. However, if you want me to step in and protect your sect, the ghost spirit sect has to do something else for me as well. Otherwise, Han Li shook his head as his voice trailed off. The yellow-robed man's eyes lit up as he asked urgently, What is it? As long as it's within the capabilities of our sect, we'll be sure to do our best. Han Li turned to the yellow-robed man and elaborated, I don't care about anyone else from the Wang family, but I don't want to see Wang Chan ever again. I have no interest in stepping in to save an enemy of mine. Do you understand what I'm saying? Elder Zhang's expression changed upon hearing this, and Yan Yanner's features paled in response. The yellow-robed man had also fallen silent, but he didn't appear to be very surprised by this demand. I understand what you mean, Brother Han. This is not an issue. What do you think, Senior Marshal Brother Zhang? The yellow-robed man turned to the elderly man. A conflicted look appeared on the elderly man's face, and he only heaved a faint sigh after a period of contemplation as he replied, "If Brother Han insists, then I'm sure Marshal Nephew Wang Chan will be willing to give his all for the sake of the sect. Seeing as Senior Marshal Brother Zhang doesn't have any objections, then I'll agree to this request on behalf of the sect." The yellow-robed man nodded without any hesitation. Throughout this entire process, he didn't ask for Yan Yanner's opinion, nor even take so much as a single glance at her. Yan Yanner's face was quite pale, but she didn't state any objections. "All right, I'll accept your presence, and I'll write a few letters in person to the controlling spirit sect and the other sects." Han Li nodded in response. The yellow-robed man was ecstatic upon hearing this. The trio from the ghost spirit sect had achieved the objective for their trip, so they didn't wish to remain in the drifting cloud sect any longer, and they rose to their feet before bidding farewell to Han Li. Han Li made no effort to keep them, and merely looked on as the three of them departed. Yan Yanner was the last one to exit the hall, and her footsteps suddenly faltered as she reached the entrance of the hall. She turned to look at Han Li with a complex expression and opened her mouth, but didn't say anything in the end. A resigned sigh escaped her lips, and she turned away again before exiting the hall. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this, and he also fell silent as he turned his gaze toward the three treasures on the table. After the three ghost spirit sect cultivators left the drifting cloud sect, they immediately rose into the air as streaks of light. Not only after they had departed from the Dreamcloud Mountains, Elder Zhang heaved a faint sigh and turned to the yellow-robed man beside him as he asked, "Junior Marshal Brother Yan, do we really have to kill Marshal Nephew Wang?" "Senior Marshal Brother Zhang, I don't want to have to do this either, but Han Li is specifically requesting for his death, and we can't afford to hesitate here. Besides, he's not asking for us to eradicate the entire Wang family, and Senior Marshal Brother Wang has more than one son, so the Wang family won't fall here. This is already a very lenient condition. After all, the Wang family has wronged him greatly in the past, and I heard that Wang Chan had almost killed him back when he was yet to reach the nascent soul stage. In that case, it really is no surprise that he's asking for Wang Chan to be killed. In my opinion, we should also banish all of our sect disciples from the Wang family as a gesture to demonstrate our sincerity. Even though Han Li has promised to help us, it would be disastrous if he were to change his mind," the yellow-robed man replied. A hesitant expression appeared on the elderly man's face upon hearing this. The yellow-robed man then turned to Yan Yanner, who had remained silent this whole time, and said in an apologetic manner, "Yanner, I'm sorry that this has to happen, but I'm sure you had already anticipated this back when you were engaged to Wang Chan. Thankfully, you've reached the nascent soul stage now while Wang Chan has failed to do so, so he doesn't deserve you anyway. Furthermore, the Wang family suddenly attacked our Yan family back then, and all of the high-grade cultivators from our family, including you, had restrictions placed upon them. I was fortunate to have been exempt from this as I was cultivating in a secret area, but that doesn't change the fact that the Wang family has betrayed our trust. Seeing as that's the case, there's no need for you to pay any heed to whether Wang Chan lives or dies. I understand all that, uncle, but he's still my Dao companion. How could I bring myself to express approval toward this arrangement? I'm going into seclusion for a century after we return to the sect. There's no need for you to inform me of what becomes of Wang Chan and the Wang family during that time," Yan Yanner said in an indifferent voice before she accelerated through the air, leaving the yellow-robed man and the elderly man behind. The yellow-robed man could only heave a resigned sigh upon seeing this, while the elderly man continued to remain silent. After a while, Elder Zhang finally conceded, "If this arrangement is beneficial to our sect, then I'll let you do as you please with the Wang family, Junior Marshal Brother Yan. Rest assured, Senior Marshal Brother Zhang, I'll be sure to handle the situation appropriately." The yellow-robed man was ecstatic. The elderly man merely shook his head without giving a reply, and he seemed to be in a rather dejected mood. The yellow-robed man didn't pay any heed to this. He knew that Elder Zhang had known Wang Chan and his father for far longer than he had, so it was only natural for him to display such a reaction. Following his initial rush of excitement, a wistful look appeared on the yellow-robed man's face as he murmured, "I still think it's quite a pity that we gave him the spirit-gathering bead, though." In response, Elder Zhang chuckled coldly and said something that came as quite a surprise to the yellow-robed man. Do you really that spirit gathering bead is something that belonged to our sect? A bewildered look appeared on the yellow-robed man's face as he asked, What do you mean, Senior Martial Brother Zhang? Didn't you personally bring out this treasure from our sect's treasure vault? I'm not sure if this treasure initially belonged to our sect, but what I can tell you is that Old Devil Conquered was the one who gave it to me, Elder Zhang chuckled. Old Devil Conquered. The yellow-robed man was even more bewildered upon hearing this. That's right. Not long ago, Old Devil Conquered suddenly came to me and presented me with this bead, telling me that it was something that our sect had once lent to the Harmonious Bond sect. He also implied to me that Grand Elder Han of the Drifting Cloud sect was the only one who could save our sect, and that this would be the best present we could offer to him. Are you finding this difficult to believe, Junior Martial Brother Yan? The elderly man asked with a meaningful look. The yellow-robed man's expression immediately changed as he speculated. Even if this bead really did belong to our sect, there's no way Old Devil Conquered would be generous enough to return it to us. Could it be that there's something wrong with that spirit-gathering bead? Letter 1D487, letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A. Letter 1D4EC, letter 1D664, letter 1D4F6. There's nothing wrong with the bead. I've examined it many times, and it's completely identical to the legendary wood spirit bead in any way. There's nothing amiss about the bead itself either. Otherwise, I wouldn't have heeded his advice and offered it to Han Li. The elderly man shook his head with a serious expression. But there's no way that Old Devil Conquered would do something like this without harboring any ulterior motives. Senior Martial Brother Zhang, you should have discussed this matter with me first. If something goes wrong here, our entire sect would be doomed. The yellow-robed man was getting very flustered. HMPH, how else were we going to recruit the assistance of the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region? As for discussing the matter with you in advance, would that have done us any good? What other course of action could we take to save our sect? If there was another way, we wouldn't have had to visit the Drifting Cloud sect and put on such a pathetic display. Elder Zhang harumphed coldly. The elderly man's remained furrowed upon hearing this, but he was at a loss for a response. After an extended period of silence, the yellow-robed man could only offer words of consolation to himself. In any case, we've already given him the bead, so it's too late to do anything now. As long as there's nothing wrong with the bead itself, we'll be fine even if something were to happen. You're certainly correct about that, Junior Martial Brother Yan. The spirit gathering bead was a vast renowned treasure even back in ancient times. After so many years, even if something were to happen, we could easily pin the blame on someone else. Besides, even the #1 cultivator of the Heavenly South region identified the bead to be authentic, so any future mishaps won't have anything to do with us. Elder Zhang chuckled coldly. The yellow-robed man contemplated the situation for a while before heaving a resigned sigh as he said, We can only hope that that's the case. However, in order to be safe, I suggest that we close our sect for 100 years right after our relocation. That's a good idea, Junior Martial Brother Yan. We'll do as you say. Elder Zhang nodded in agreement. After that, the two Ghost Spirit Sect elders weren't interested in discussing anything else, and they immediately accelerated in pursuit of Yan Yanner. Meanwhile, within a restricted area in the Harmonious Bond Sect, there was a humanoid figure sitting on a massive rock deep within the heavenly Yang Pond. The entire area was enshrouded in thick gray mist, and the humanoid figure murmured to himself, It's about time that the treasure was delivered to that hand brat. With this wood spirit bead, your rate of cultivation will be drastically enhanced, but when you reach the deity transformation stage bottleneck, A burst of eerie chuckling suddenly escaped from the humanoid figure's mouth. Han Li sat within the guest pavilion and fiddled around with the wood spirit bead for a while. Just as he was about to stow it away along with the other two treasures, the voice of a small child suddenly rang out. Fellow Taoist Han, are you really planning to keep this bead? Han Li faltered slightly before his brows furrowed, and he asked, Why do you ask? Is there something wrong with this spirit-gathering bead? There's nothing wrong with the bead itself, but don't you know that spirit-gathering beads are inherently flawed treasures? If you use this bead to cultivate, your cultivation base and magic power will indeed progress at a phenomenal rate, but once you reach a bottleneck, you'll know what the inherent flaw in this treasure is. High-grade cultivators who use this bead to cultivate will find it many times harder to break through bottlenecks than other cultivators. This is because while the bead does increase your rate of spiritual chi absorption, it also blunts your sensitivity toward the other types of spiritual chi. For cultivators below the nascent soul stage, the negative effects stemming from that won't be very apparent. However, for a cultivator like you, who will need to sense all types of the world's origin chi in order to make a breakthrough, this bead is more trouble than it's worth. As such, the spirit gathering bead is indeed a treasure that's very tempting to use, but in the spirit realm, it's only given to low-grade cultivators with mediocre aptitudes. No high-grade cultivator would ever use something like this, the small child explained in detail. Is that so? So what you're saying is that this treasure is completely useless to me? That's not necessarily the case. If you can find a few rare wood attribute materials, you'll be able to convert this bead into another type of treasure known as the wood birth bead. That bead won't be able to accelerate your cultivation, but after you completely refine it, you'll able to attain the immortal body ability. Even though you'll only be able to use that ability once, it'll save your life in a perilous situation, the small child replied. Immortal body. Han Li was very surprised to hear this. He had been yearning for such an ability for a long time. However, he had only seen this ability present in extremely powerful demon beasts, elder devils, and devilish corpses that had undergone devilification. He had never heard of any human cultivator who had managed to attain this ability. That's right. Each wood birth bead will allow you to unleash immortal body ability once. Following the ability's activation, even if you get decapitated or your entire body gets cut in half, you'll be able to make a full recovery, the small child replied with a chuckle. Really now? But if I can only use it once, doesn't that make it a disposable treasure? Han Li was quite tempted, but also a little skeptical. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 212F, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D4C2. Being able to unleash the immortal body ability once will be enough to save your life under some circumstances. Why do you still look so dissatisfied? In any case, the other wood attribute ingredients required to craft the wood birth bead will be very difficult to find in the human world, and it's yet to be seen whether you'll even be able to refine the treasure. The small child harumphed with a hint of displeasure on his face. What other materials do I need? I have a pretty big collection of wood attribute materials, Han Li replied with an unfazed smile. I'll give you a copy of the list of required materials, but if you want me to tell you the refinement method, you'll have to give me some things in return, the small child said in a straightforward manner. Sure, feel free to tell me what you need, fellow Taoist Endless Sky. The fact that the small child was making demands came as quite a relief to Han Li. If the Endless Sky beast were willing to tell him the refinement method free of charge, he would have been feeling quite uneasy instead. After all, even though the two of them had built up a certain level of camaraderie following the lightning tribulation, it was still quite a stretch for them to refer to one another as friends. Thus, Han Li remained rather cautious of the Endless Sky beast. He wasn't naive enough to think that they were best friends after just a few mutually beneficial deals and exchanges. The Endless Sky beast was mostly helping him, because he was the owner of the Heaven Void Cauldron, and the demon beast was unable to escape from the cauldron, so he had no choice but to appease Han Li to a certain extent. Even though I've successfully reached the metamorphosis stage, I still require some medicines to fortify my cultivation base. I'm sure you'll be able to easily secure those medicines for me, Brother Han, the small child proposed. No problem. Give me a list of what you need along with the refinement method, Han Li replied without any hesitation. All right, when you get back to the cave abode, I'll give you the list of required materials, the refinement method, and a list of the medicines I'm looking for. The small child was very pleased with Han Li's straightforward reply. Han Li smiled upon hearing this before placing the wood spirit bead back into its wooden box, then flipping his hand over to stow all three treasures away into his storage pouch. All of a sudden, a cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes as he asked, "Fellow Taoist Endless Sky, do you think the Ghost Spirit Sect cultivators were aware of the wood spirit bead's inherent flaw?" That's hard to say. From the sounds of it, this bead was abandoned long ago by ancient cultivators, and information about its inherent flaw doesn't appear to have been passed down. If a nascent soul cultivator from the Ghost Spirit Sect specializing in wood attribute cultivation arts had used bead before, then they would definitely have been able to identify its flaws. Otherwise, there's no way to detect anything wrong just from the bead itself. Are you suspecting that those three are trying to prevent you from reaching the deity transformation stage? The small child asked. And Li stroked his chin and deduced, "That was my initial thought process, but then I realized that there's no motive for the Ghost Spirit Sect to do such a thing. After all, Even if I can't reach the deity transformation stage, I'm already a late nascent soul cultivator, and I'll still be the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region. Aren't they afraid that I'll identify the flaw in the bead and destroy the entire ghost spirit sect in a fit of rage? There must be more to this story than meets the eye. Let me think about this. The mastermind behind all this who's trying to use the ghost spirit sect against me is most likely a cultivator from the Heavenly South region. But why would it benefit them to prevent me from reaching the deity transformation stage? Even if I don't reach that level, there's still no one in the Heavenly South region who's a match for me. The only downside to this is that I won't be able to lengthen my lifespan, and I'll pass away after reaching around 1,000 years of age. As such, the period of time during which our drifting cloud sect will be able to exert dominance over the other sects of the Heavenly South region will be significantly curtailed. However, to normal sects, it doesn't really matter which sect reigns supreme in the Heavenly South region. There are only a handful of sects who can contend for this position, and it's most likely one of the Flowing Mind sect, the Harmonious Bond sect, or the High Zenith sect. Alternatively, it could be all three of those sects joining forces to plot against me. The small child was quite stunned by Han Li's analytical prowess, and only after a long while did a wry smile appear on his face as he said, "Now that you put it that way, things have been made a lot clearer. So you think that the other three late nascent soul great cultivators are behind all this?" Han Li rose to his feet and paced a few steps within the hall. He then looked up at the ceiling, and a cold smile appeared on his face as he said, "Perhaps. In any case, this is all just speculation. Who knows what could really be going on behind the scenes? I'm not sure if I'm right either. It's easy if you want to find out the truth. Just capture one of those three, then use a soul search technique on them," the small child suggested with a low chuckle. A sharp light flashed through his eyes, but he shook his head after a moment of contemplation as he said, "It would be indeed simple to capture one of them, but that's beside the point. Even if I've hit the nail on the head here, it would be inappropriate for me to attack any of those three sects without any concrete evidence. Otherwise, I'll be viewed as a public enemy. All other cultivators fear and revere me as the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, but if I were to abuse that title, then more people would become resentful and fearful toward me. Maybe someone will take advantage of this opportunity to turn the entire Heavenly South region against me. No matter how powerful I am, I won't be able to stand against the entire cultivation world of the Heavenly South region, and there have been previous instances of something like this happening before. You're way too much of a coward, Han Brat. If someone tried to plot against me like this in the spirit realm, hee. Whatever, it's up to you in the end. As long as you can keep yourself from getting killed, I won't try to influence your decisions," the small child said in a lazy voice. "Don't worry, now that I know there are people plotting against me, I'll be sure to be careful. As for this incident, I'll pretend to be oblivious to it for now. If whoever's behind this doesn't try any more little trick, then I'll let them be, but if they try something else, I'm sure I'll be able to catch them next time. As soon as I find some concrete evidence, HMPH, they'll learn what it means to wish they were dead." Han Li's expression remained quite calm, but the menacing threat in his voice was quite apparent. The small child merely chuckled, without saying anything this time. Han Li remained within the hall for a while longer before finally exiting the guest pavilion. He then turned his gaze toward another nearby pavilion, and his brows furrowed slightly. He could understand Han Yunjai coming to find him, but what business did Dong Xuaner have with him? He was not on good terms with the latter of these two women. Dong Xuaner was extremely beautiful, but she had left him with quite a negative impression. However, there was also something else that Han Li was confused about. He had once heard from a Harmonious Bond sect disciple that, after Dong Xuaner had reached the core formation stage, she had deployed people to search for him for a period of time. Why was that? Han Li looked at the pavilion with a hesitant look, but still decided to make his way toward it in the end. After entering the pavilion, he was greeted by the sight of two beautiful female cultivators, one of whom was standing while the other was seated in a chair, and both of them were completely silent. The one in the chair was a yellow-robed woman with a set of gentle features, making her appear very warm and approachable. The one who was standing was an extremely seductive white-robed woman who gave off an air of frailty. However, that sense of fragile vulnerability evoked within the onlooker the urge to protect her, thereby further contributing to her allure. Han Li's arrival immediately drew the attention of the two female cultivators. "I'm quite surprised that you two came to visit me, fellow Taoists. We're all old acquaintances, and seeing you two evokes many past memories in me." and Li approached the two women with a faint smile on his face. A hint of elation appeared in the yellow-robed woman's eyes at the sight of Han Li. She hurriedly rose to her feet, but was seemingly at a loss for what to do as she said, "Brother Han. No. Senior Han, I hope my visit isn't causing any trouble for you." As for the white-robed Dong Chuaner, her vibrant red lips moved a few times, but she didn't say anything in the end. However, the expression on her face was slightly complex, seemingly a mixture of excitement and joy, as well as hints of distance and resentment. "I'm overjoyed to see you here, fellow Taoist Han. It's certainly not too much trouble for me at all. You don't need to refer to me as senior this or senior that either. Just call me Big Brother Han. You seem to have reached the mid-core formation stage already. Looks like it won't be long before you progress to the late-core formation stage," Han Li greeted with a smile. The yellow-robed woman blushed slightly, before nodding her head with elation upon hearing this. "We've come here to thank Big Brother Han for sparing my life on 2 separate occasions. If another cultivator had been in your shoes, I would have most likely died twice already," Han Yunjai said in a grateful voice. Han Li faltered initially upon hearing before bursting into laughter. "Looks like you've recovered all of your memories surrounding the trial by blood and fire, and you're aware that I was responsible for what happened next." Han Li was unconsciously regarding this woman as something like his little sister, and Han Yunjai also harbored similar feelings toward Han Li. As such, they were only a few sentences into their conversation, but she had already forgotten Han Li's current lofty status and was speaking to him in an intimate manner as if he really were her elder brother. As their conversation progressed, the two of them began to talk about the Great South meeting and the trial by blood and fire, and both of them were filled with nostalgia. Back when they had attended this meeting, neither of them could have imagined that they would be standing where they stood today, 200 to 300 years down the track. At the time, they had to look up to even Foundation establishment cultivators. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to Han Yunjai, and she abruptly turned to Dong Chuaner with a smile as she said, "By the way, I met this big sister Dong during the ceremony. I heard that she was once a member of the same sect as Big Brother Han, and she has something she wants to speak to you about. Fairy Dong and I did indeed once both cultivate in Yellow Maple Valley. However, it appears that your cultivation base hasn't progressed in the slightest since I last saw you, fellow Taoist Dong." Only after hearing Han Yunjai's words did Han Li turn to Dong Chuaner with an indifferent expression. Dong Chuaner's face suddenly became quite flush, and she gritted her teeth with fury as she retorted, "It's all because of you that I became like this." Han Li was completely bemused. Han Yunjai also blinked with befuddlement in her eyes. Han Li soon came to his senses and was naturally unhappy to hear this. As such, his expression darkened as he asked, "What do you mean by that, Fairy Dong? How could your stalling cultivation base have anything to do with me? If it weren't for the fact that you became an inner demon of mine, how could I have tried and failed to make breakthroughs on so many occasions? It's all because of you that I'm still stuck at the mid-core formation stage even after all these years." Dong Chuaner's rage seemed to have also made her forget Han Li's current identity, and she began to vent all of her fury and frustration. "Inner demon," Han Li murmured to himself with a hint of bewilderment on his face. "Back when I was at the Yan clan fortress, I was abducted by Tian Buke and forcibly taken back to the Harmonious Bond sect. Only then did I discover my true lineage. It turns out that I'm a directly lineal descendant of the Harmonious Bond sect's old devil Cloudpart. It was only through an accident that I ended up becoming a disciple of the Yellow Maple sect. Before I was even born, old devil Cloudpart used a secret technique known as the graceful dream art on me, which is a cultivation art related to cultivation and bewitching charming techniques. The cultivation art would significantly enhance my rate of cultivation, yet the easiest, but also the most difficult obstacle for cultivators using this cultivation art would be the trial of the inner demons. If it turned out to be easy, then the obstacle would be virtually non-existent, and I'd progress as easily as eating food or drinking water. However, if it proved to be difficult, then I could be impeded by my inner demons for the rest of my life, in which case my cultivation base would never progress. In fact, there have even been precedents in other cultivators using this cultivation art, where their inner demons have been too strong, and their cultivation base had even been forced to regress as a result." Dong Chuaner spat through gritted teeth. After a prolonged flabbergasted silence, a peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face as he asked, "Even so, how did I become an inner demon of yours? I've barely even met you before." "How would I know? As soon as I reached the core formation stage, you began to appear in my cultivation as my inner demon. Even though I was able to barely make a breakthrough to the mid-core formation stage by recruiting some external assistance, I haven't been able to progress ever since. I have to overcome the obstacles posed by my inner demons before I can continue to make progress. I also asked old devil Cloudpart about this, and he told me that the reason you became my inner demon was most likely because you used some kind of special cultivation arts in the past, and was immune to my bewitching charming techniques as a result. After that, when I was abducted and suffered backlash from my own bewitching charming technique, you left too strong of an impression in my heart, thereby becoming my inner demon. Han Li was completely speechless. Han Yunjai was also completely bewildered. After a long while, Han Li finally managed to compose himself. A cold light flashed through his eyes as he asked, I heard that you once deployed some people to search for me right after you progressed to the core formation stage. If you had found me, how were you going to take care of your inner demons? How else does anyone overcome their inner demons? They either have to do so by sheer force of will or destroy the subject responsible for the manifestation of their inner demons. Alternatively, at the time, I wanted to employ the latter of those two methods. Dong Xuan'er was stuttering slightly as she spoke, and a blush suddenly appeared on her face, further enhancing her seductive charm. Han Li's eyes narrowed initially upon hearing Dong Xuan'er's words, but after listening to everything she had to say, a surprised look appeared in his eyes. A thought then seemed to have occurred to him, and a slightly awkward expression surfaced on his face. He was silent for a moment before asking, I know why you're here now. You want me to use my spiritual sense to pass my secret technique onto so you can overcome your inner demons, right? Dong Xuan'er had also recomposed herself as she willingly admitted, That's right. I wanted to request for your help during the Mulan invasion, but at the time, you'd already progressed to the nascent soul stage, and I hesitated to approach you, thus missing out on that opportunity. What makes you so sure that I would help you, fellow Taoist Dong? Han Li asked with a faint smile on his face. You're already the #1 cultivator in the Heavenly South region, so I don't know if you'd be willing to help a lowly core formation cultivator like me, either. However, if I want to have any chance of reaching the nascent soul stage, then this is my only hope, Dong Xuan'er replied with an indignant look in her eyes. I know that we aren't exactly on good terms with one another, but we were once both disciples of the same sect, and your inner demon did stem from me. Helping you out here won't be a difficult task for me, so I can lend you my assistance on this occasion, Han Li said in a slow voice. Really? Dong Xuan'er was elated to hear this. It would be easy for my current self to help you overcome your inner demon. Why would I lie to you? However, after this, the two of us will no longer have anything to do with one another. Don't expect me to lend you any further assistance in your cultivation, Han Li warned. Dong Xuan'er's face paled upon hearing this, and she was silent for a moment before replying expressionlessly. I'm already extremely grateful that you're willing to help me just this once. I wouldn't dare to dream of troubling you any further. All right, take a rest here for 3 days, fellow Taoist Dong. 3 days later, I'll come back here and help you overcome your inner demon, Han Li replied calmly. Dong Xuan'er nodded in an aloof manner and refrained from speaking any further. After that, Han Li and Han Yunjai chatted for a while longer before he departed from the pavilion. 5 days later, Dong Xuan'er and Han Yunjai departed from the Drifting Cloud sect one after the other, returning to their respective Controlling Spirit sect and Harmonious Bond sect. After receiving Han Li's help in overcoming her inner demons, Dong Xuan'er would encounter no further impediment during her attempt to progress to the late core formation stage. Meanwhile, Han Yunjai received many treasures and pills from Han Li, and he also entrusted her with a letter addressed to the Grand Elder of the Controlling Spirit sect. When Han Li descended in front of his cave abode as an azure streak of light, there was a young woman in a white palatial dress waiting for him with a smile on her face. As soon as Han Li arrived, she asked in a gentle voice, Why did little sister Yunjai leave so soon? You could have asked her to stay for a few more days. There's no need for that. Spending a few days here with me is enough for her. Han Li shook his head with a smile. By the way, I just received some news about your other soulmate, that violet spirit woman. She reached the nascent soul stage several years ago and has since embarked on a journey to the Great Jin. You probably won't be able to see her for a while, Nan Gongwan said with a hint of a smile on her face. Han Li smiled and replied, With violet spirit's aptitude, it's no surprise that she was able to progress to the nascent soul stage. As for whether she's here in the Heavenly South region or not, that's completely inconsequential. We'll naturally meet again if we're fated to do so. Also, I'm getting some tool refinement materials sent here in a few days, and I plan to go into seclusion after that. I want to get to the pinnacle of the late nascent soul stage as quickly as possible, then completely master the great development technique. After that, I'll fuse the 5 types of glacial flames with the unbroken sync devils. Sure, I was just thinking about making a breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage as well. Hopefully, we'll both have achieved our objectives when we come out of seclusion. Nangongwan nodded with a gentle smile. Haha, I certainly hope that would prove to be the case. However, in the days before I go into seclusion, you'll have to keep me company in my lonely nights. A sinister look suddenly appeared in Han Li's eyes as his eyes roamed over Nangongwan's sensitive regions. When did you become such a smooth talker? Nangongwan scoffed with a deep blush on her face, but the amusement in her eyes was quite apparent. This is the first time anyone has called me a smooth talker in my life. You're probably the only one who'll get to see my smooth-talking side. Han Li threw his head back and chortled heartily as his laughter echoed throughout the interconnected peaks. Within the cave abode on another peak, a young girl was reading a jade slip in her hand, and her concentration was broken by Han Li's raucous laughter. A sweet smile also appeared on her face before she turned her attention back to her jade slip. Within the secret chamber on the main peak of the Dreamcloud Mountains, everything was enshrouded in a vast expanse of white mist. It seemed that a restriction had been set up within the entire secret chamber. At the center of a chamber sat a man with his legs crossed, and azure light shimmering all over his body. Around him were 5 pristine white jade-like humanoid skeletons that were also seated with their legs crossed. These skeletons were enveloped in a layer of grayish-white devilish chi, yet all of their mouths were slightly agape, and there were respectively black, white, blue, yellow, and green flames shimmering within. The azure humanoid figure sitting at the very center of the chamber had his palm almost joined together in front of his chest, and there was a ball of indistinct purple flames burning between his hands. This humanoid figure was none other than Han Li, who had been seclusion for an indeterminate number of years. All of a sudden, silver light flashed on the wall, and another azure humanoid figure appeared within the restriction, standing next to the wall in a completely stationary manner. After a long while, Han Li suddenly opened his mouth, and the ball of purple fire was sucked into his mouth as a purple line of flames. In contrast, the 5 skeletons nearby all closed their mouths, and the different colored flames within disappeared in a flash. Immediately thereafter, the grayish-white devilish chi over their bodies quickly receded to reveal the skeletons, which had turned into different colors that matched their respective flames. At this moment, Han Li slowly opened his eyes, but they were still completely glazed over. Only after a long while did his pupils regain their clarity. He turned his gaze toward the azure humanoid figure off to the side, and his brows furrowed slightly. That azure humanoid figure was naturally none other than the humanoid puppet, which Han Li had left outside the cave abode. During these past few years, Han Li would summon the humanoid puppet to him at regular intervals to assimilate it with the second nascent soul again, but aside from that, the puppet was left to look after the cave abode. Now that it had suddenly appeared here, something important that had to be brought to his attention must have happened. Han Li felt this to be rather strange. After all, the second nascent soul paired with the humanoid puppet was not inferior in power to a normal great cultivator, so what could have happened that even it wasn't able to take care of? With that in mind, he immediately swept his spiritual sense toward the humanoid puppet and began to assimilate with the second nascent soul's spiritual sense. After around 15 minutes had passed, a peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face. The stationary humanoid puppet suddenly raised a hand before pulling an item out of the storage pouch hanging from its waist, then calmly handing it over to Han Li. Han Li immediately accepted the item to find that it was a broken jade talisman around half the size of a palm. After injecting his spiritual power into object, many tiny crimson characters began to appear on its surface. Han Li only glanced at these characters for a short while before a contemplative look appeared on his face. "Fellow Taoist Endless Sky, you're also awake now, right? It looks like we've been in seclusion for a long time." Han Li's voice was slightly raspy and stiff from not speaking for so long. "It's only been about 120 to 130 years, not really all that long. Why do you say that? Do you want to come out of seclusion now? You've reached a critical juncture in combining your glacial flames and unbroken sync devils. It'll only take another decade or so before the 5 devils will be able to successfully refine the 5 type of glacial flames. Wouldn't it be a pity if you left now?" Spiritual light flashed, and a small cauldron flew out from within Han Li's sleeve. The cauldron hovered before him, and the figure of a small child appeared above it. In its current state, the demon beast appeared to be 2 or 3 years older than it was when it had first gone into seclusion with Han Li. Han Li shook his head and said, "It's not really a big deal. I can just continue the refinement process when I come back. It's just that this myriad distance talisman is revealing to me some news from the scattered star seas. I once made a deal with the heavenly star sages, and it looks like Ling Yuling is in trouble now, so I can't just ignore the situation." Heavenly star sages. You mean that late nascent soul stage couple from the scattered star seas? Back then, I used a secret technique to examine their bodily conditions. They did have an abundance of magic power within their bodies, but they appear to be approaching the ends of their lifespans at the time. Even if they haven't been killed, they've most likely passed away already. Otherwise, with that couple looking after the Star Palace, why would this Ling Yuling request assistance from you? The small child speculated. The message that Ling Yuling sent me has indeed neglected to mention the heavenly star sages, so it's most likely the case that they truly have passed away already. This is an opportunity for me as well. I've always been very interested in the Star Palace's divine essence-effused light. I've carefully studied the methods to progress to the deity transformation stage that the heavenly star sages provided me with, and the only viable one is to completely master the divine essence-effused light. During this trip, I can go and obtain that cultivation method, Han Li mused. I've never heard of a cultivation art known as the divine essence-effused light in the spirit realm before, so this is most likely something created by a cultivator of this world. Won't you be dabbling in too many different areas if you use this cultivation art? Take care that you don't let these things distract you from your pursuit of the great Tao, the small child cautioned. I'm aware of this. Prior to cultivating the divine essence-effused light, I'll make sure to progress to the pinnacle of the late nascent soul stage first, then try to use my glacial flames to try and break through the deity transformation stage bottleneck. If I can succeed in doing that, then there would be no need to cultivate the divine essence-effused light. Otherwise, I have no choice in this matter, Han Li said with a grave expression. If that's the case, then I don't really have anything else to say. I also know many methods that can help once progress to the deity transformation stage, but it's a shame that they would be ineffective in this world due to the sparse spiritual chi here. By the way, how have you been cultivating for the past century? The magic power within your body seems to have grown a lot more abundant, the small child asked after assessing Han Li's bodily condition. That may be true, but I'm still far away from reaching the pinnacle of the late nascent soul stage. It's going to take me at least another 50 to 60 years of cultivation to get there, and that's only through constantly taking all types of pills as well. If I were to cultivate through meditation alone, I most likely wouldn't be able to reach that point even after an entire century. Han Li heaved a forlorn sigh. At this moment, Han Li suddenly thought of the Fuschia cloud pill that he had refined in that mysterious medicine garden. If he had a sufficient number of such pills, he would be able to accelerate his rate of cultivation by severalfold. It was a pity that certain types of spirit herbs required to refine the Fuschia cloud pill had already gone extinct, and it was impossible to take those spirit herbs out of the medicine garden and plant them in the outside world. At his current cultivation base, the pills that he was taking had a very limited enhancement effect for him, and he was rather dissatisfied with their efficacy. Furthermore, he hadn't been wasting the green liquid in that mysterious vial during these past years, either. After setting aside a sufficient amount to satisfy his pill refinement requirements, the rest of that liquid had all been used to cleanse his spirit eyes and mature his spirit insects. However, he stopped cleansing his spirit eyes after just over 20 years over. This was because, after cleansing his spirit eyes countless times, the Brightside spirit water no longer provided any benefits to him. As such, it would have been simply wasteful to continue cleansing his eyes with the spirit water. Despite that, Han Li's spirit eyes had already undergone a drastic transformation. After injecting spiritual power into his eyes, not only was Han Li able to see through clouds and mist, he could see objects that were 10,000 feet away as clearly as if they were right before his eyes. In that case, unless he found himself confined within a restriction that cut off one's spiritual sense, his spirit eyes would prove to be extremely pragmatic and useful to him. After maturing for over 100 years, the six-winged frost centipede finally grew their second pairs of wings. As such, they had ascended straight from 5th-grade demon beasts to become 7th-grade demon beasts, and at the same time, they had attained the power to control wind and snow. If all 12 centipedes were to unleash their full power in unison, they could instantly transform an area with a radius of over 5 kilometers into a glacial land. In contrast, the gold-devouring beetles showed no signs of imminent evolution yet. He had obtained a method from Saintess Tianlin to mature these beetles through the use of five-elemental spiritual qi, but it was clearly not the right time to employ such a technique. It appeared that he was going to have to nurture these spirit insects for many more years before that course of action became applicable. As for the armored earth dragon that he had found in the Great Jinn, which was only proficient in searching for heavenly materials and earthly treasures, it was also very content to cultivate by itself in the cave abode. However, judging from its cultivation base, it was still very far away from reaching the 8th-grade metamorphosis stage. In terms of cultivation arts, Han Li was cultivating the Azure Essence Sword art and the Great Development technique at the same time. Perhaps it was due to the changes in his spiritual root aptitude, or perhaps it was because he really did have exceptional aptitude in spiritual sense cultivation. In any case, he was able to cultivate up to the final layer of the Great Development technique in one fell swoop, and the process seemed to have gone even smoother than when he was cultivating the first few layers. As such, his spiritual sense had become several times more powerful than it once was. If he could also cultivate the final layer of the Great Development technique, then his spiritual sense wouldn't be inferior even to that of the average deity transformation cultivator. Aside from the remarkable improvements in his spiritual sense, Han Li's current body was also powerful beyond belief. Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. In order to facilitate the cultivation of the 9 Gale transformations, he cultivated the 3rd layer of the Bright Jade arts. Even though it didn't take him much time to do so, the level of difficulty and the excruciating pain involved almost made Han Li give up midway. It was no wonder that very people reached the 3rd layer or above, even in the spirit realm. However, after cultivating the 3rd layer of the Bright Jade arts, Han Li's had even surprised himself with how powerful his body had become. At present, he was able to remain completely unscathed in the face of attacks from normal treasures, without even having to unleash his protective spiritual layer. As for the 9 Gale transformations, that cultivation art had been extremely easy to progress in, and he had completely mastered it within the short span of a few years. During his seclusion, Han Li had also refined a few treasures. He naturally prioritized the refinement of the wood birth bead, which would grant him the immortal body ability on one occasion. Coincidentally, the most important supplementary materials required to refine this bead were the soul-nurturing tree and the spirit well tree, 2 of the 3 divine woods. To others, these items were extremely difficult to find in the human world, but this was not an issue for Han Li. As such, he was able to easily refine the wood birth bead before absorbing it into his body. Aside from this bead, he also refined the pair of poisonous hooks he had obtained from the twin-tailed human-faced scorpion, as well as the fire dragon pillars he had sourced from the Kunwu Mountains into 2 sets of powerful treasures. Han Li was tallying the rewards he had reaped during this period of seclusion when he suddenly waved a sleeve through the air, tossing out a black jade vial as he began to chant something. The 5 skeletons nearby immediately shuddered as grayish-white devilish chi abruptly surfaced over their bodies, transforming them into ghostly heads each around the size of a wagon wheel. There were also devilish flames blasting out from the mouths of the ghostly heads, creating an extremely sinister sight to behold. Han Li raised a hand and cast an incantation seal toward the ghostly heads, upon which they quickly shrank down to around the size of human fists. A burst of light then erupted from the black jade vials, sucking in all 5 ghostly heads. Han Li stowed the jade vial away before rising to his feet. He swept his sleeve toward a patch of white light on the wall of the secret chamber, and spiritual light flashed as the restriction within the chamber quickly receded, revealing the stone door at its entrance. Han Li made his way over to the stone door expressionlessly, while the humanoid puppet disappeared on the spot amid a flash of silver light. In the state of Yue, located in the center of the heavenly south region, there had been wars raging almost constantly among in the cultivation world, and rarely were there any prolonged periods of peace. The 6 sects in the state of Yue were first vanquished by the Devil Dao, and following that was a war among the sects of the Devil Dao for supremacy and control over the state of Yue, a war that was won by the Ghost Spirit Sect in the end. However, around a century ago, the Ghost Spirit Sect had lost many of its high-grade cultivators during the battle in the Devil Fall Valley, and the controlling Spirit Sect took advantage of this opportunity, allying with the other sects to force the Ghost Spirit Sect out of the state of Yue. As such, the state of UA had since been split among the Devil Dao sects with the controlling Spirit Sect as their new leader. The current might and influence of the controlling Spirit Sect allowed them to take over close to half of the spirit veins and spirit mines in the state of UA, and one of those spirit mines was situated underground beneath a certain large valley. The spirit stone reserves here were initially quite abundant, but following relentless excavation for the past several centuries by the 6 sects of the state of UA, then by the Ghost Spirit Sect and the controlling Spirit Sect, the supply of spirit stones had finally begun to run dry, and the mine itself was in a semi-abandoned state. Aside from 2 Qi condensation disciples from the controlling Spirit Sect, there were no other cultivators present to guard the spirit mine. On that day, the 2 controlling Spirit Sect disciples were standing at the underground entrance of the mine, chatting about some recent events that had taken place within the sect. Meanwhile, on the surface of the ground above their heads, an azure humanoid figure burrowed soundlessly into the earth using an earth movement technique, then appeared within a certain nondescript cave in the deepest part of the mine. Throughout this entire process, the 2 controlling Spirit Sect disciples were completely oblivious to his arrival. Yellow light flashed, and the humanoid figure revealed himself to be a young man with a set of mundane features. He took a glance at an empty corner of the cave, and a faint smile appeared on his face. This man was naturally none other than Han Li, who had traveled all the way from the state of Zai. A month ago, after coming out of seclusion in the state of Zai, he hadn't encountered Nangongwan. Nangongwan cultivated in a manner that was different from Han Li. During the past century, she had come out of seclusion on several occasions and traveled to all parts of the heavenly south region for extended periods of time in order to train her mind. When Han Li had finally emerged from seclusion, Nangongwan had re-entered her secret chamber several years prior to that, and was in the midst of her next spell of seclusion and cultivation. Han Li was rather disappointed, but nor was he going to disrupt Nangongwan's cultivation just to see her again. Instead, he merely sent her a voice transmission talisman, informing her of the fact that he was going to be embarking on a long journey, then visited La Quarter Luo and Liu Yu in the Drifting Cloud sect. The 2 of them were naturally ecstatic to see Han Li. During the past century or so, the 2 had worked tirelessly to expand the Drifting Cloud sect, and it had now become one of the handful of most renowned sects in the heavenly south region. During this time, Song Yu had already reached the nascent soul stage, becoming the 4th nascent soul cultivator of the Drifting Cloud sect. Han Li was naturally quite pleased to hear this. What was surprising to him was that, after many years of searching, Song Yu finally found a disciple who possessed an inherently powerful spiritual sense from birth over 10 years ago. However, due to the fact that Han Li was still in seclusion at the time, this disciple was left to cultivate in the sect on their own. Apparently, the disciple also possessed quite an exceptional spiritual root aptitude with a dual-attribute spiritual root. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this, and he immediately requested to meet this disciple. He discovered that this disciple was a slightly thin and frail-looking 16 to 17-year-old young man with a set of delicate features. Han Li examined the young man in person to find that he did, indeed, possess an inherently powerful spiritual sense from birth, one that was several times more powerful than cultivators of the same cultivation base. Most importantly, the young man had a very honest and steady personality, which Han Li was very pleased with. Thus, he cut straight to the point and asked the young man if he were willing to become his disciple. The young man's name was Xianxia, and he was already aware of who Han Li was. As such, he was naturally overjoyed that the number 1 cultivator in the heavenly south region was willing to take him as his disciple. As such, he immediately fell to his knees and kowtowed to Han Li, officially becoming his disciple. Han Li chortled heartily before taking the young man back to the interconnected peaks. He erected a new cave abode for the young man on one of the peaks, and also gave him a copy of the Great Development Treasure Scriptures. He reinforced to the young man the importance of cultivating the Great Development technique, but allowed him to choose any other cultivation art in the treasured scriptures that he wished to cultivate alongside the Great Development technique. The monarch of soul divergence was an extremely talented cultivator, so there were many cultivation arts enclosed in his treasured scriptures. Xianxia was still only a Qi condensation stage disciple, and Han Li left him a sufficient number of pills to support his cultivation. He also summoned his other disciple, Tian Qinner, to instruct Xianxia in his cultivation while he was away. Even though Tian Qinner possessed the dragon cry physique, She was also able to cultivate her way to the mid-foundation establishment stage during the past century with the assistance of the large number of pills given to her by the humanoid puppet. Just as Han Li had expected, it appeared that it wouldn't be impossible for her to reach the core formation stage. After accepting the young man as his disciple, Han Li felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Before the monarch of soul divergence had passed away, he had asked Han Li to find a disciple in his stead to pass the great development treasured scriptures onto. As soon as the young man reached the core formation stage or above, Han Li was planning to bestow upon him several powerful treasures, then send him to the far west so he could take over as the Thousand Bamboo Sect Master and receive the inheritance left behind by the monarch of soul divergence. As for Mu Paling, who was also residing in a cave abode on one of the interconnected peaks, Nangongwan had bestowed upon her a secret technique from the masked moon sect, and she had been able to cultivate it to make great strides in her cultivation, reaching the late core formation stage. She was in seclusion day and night, arduously cultivating her magic power so she could attempt to break through to the nascent soul stage. However, Han Li wasn't very optimistic about her future prospects. Mu Paling's aptitude was far from mediocre, but almost every nascent soul cultivator had to encounter a miraculous opportunity that was unique to them before reaching the nascent soul stage. Mu Paling was working extremely hard in her cultivation, but if she didn't encounter such an opportunity, her chances of reaching the nascent soul stage were quite abysmal. After taking care of everything that required his attention in the sect as well as within his own cave abode, Han Li immediately departed from the Dreamcloud Mountains and headed straight for the state of Yue. After all, from the message that Ling Yuling had sent him, the Star Palace was in a very perilous situation and was being completely dominated by the Starfall Coalition. Otherwise, she wouldn't have resorted to sending out a request for help using her myriad distance talisman. And Li didn't want to delay for too long before getting to the scattered star seas, only to find that Lin Yuling had already perished in battle. Now, he was back in the underground cave that the ancient teleportation formation had been situated in. Even though he had intentionally destroyed the teleportation formation on the previous occasion he had been here, he simply had to repair it before he could teleport to the scattered star seas. What came as quite a relief to Han Li was that there were only 2 chi condensation cultivators guarding this place. Even the most basic of concealment techniques could ensure that the 2 of them didn't notice that anything was amiss. With that in mind, Han Li grabbed the storage pouch hanging from his waist before tossing it into the air. The storage pouch spun in the air before the opening of the pouch turned upside down, and a burst of white light erupted from within, heading directly toward the ground. The white light receded, and a large pile of materials about half as tall as a grown man was revealed. The majority of the pile consisted of various types of strange rocks and stones. Han Li waved a hand upward expressionlessly, and white light began to flash within the storage pouch again. On this occasion, a dozen or so formation flags and several formation plates shot forth from within. All of them hovered in midair following their emergence, shimmering with spiritual light of all types of colors. Han Li chanted something before gently sweeping his sleeve toward their formation tools. All of a sudden, these treasures transformed into streaks of light of various different colors, flying in all directions before disappearing into the walls of the cave in a flash. Large swathes of white mist then began to billow out from within the walls of the cave, concealing Han Li within in the blink of an eye. Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D633, letter 212F, letter 212F, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D4B7, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D455. If a cultivator were to walk past the cave at this moment, they would simply be greeted by the sight of an empty cave within which nothing was amiss. The restriction created by the formation had completely concealed Han Li as well as that large pile of formation materials. Meanwhile, Han Li was already busy at work. With his current wealth of knowledge and experience, it was an extremely simple matter for Han Li to set up a small teleportation formation, provided that there were enough materials available. As such, a brand new teleportation formation had been erected in the corner of the cave in just 2 days. After examining the formation one last time, Han Li cast an incantation seal toward it. White light flashed from the center of the formation, following which a burst of buzzing rang out. Immediately thereafter, spiritual light flashed over various spots on the teleportation formation before fading of their own accord. It appeared that there were no issues with the teleportation formation, so Han Li could use it immediately. Han Li was elated to see this, and his body swayed before appearing within the teleportation formation in the blink of an eye. However, just as he was about to activate the formation, he cast his gaze around the cave, and a hesitant look appeared on his face. After a brief period of contemplation, he suddenly patted one of the spirit beast pouches hanging from his waist. A hissing sound rang out, following which the pouch's opening widened, and a burst of white wind and snow erupted from within. Immediately thereafter, 12 snowy white centipedes were revealed. Each of them had 2 pairs of wings on their backs, and they were all very menacing in appearance. After releasing these 6-winged frost centipede, Han Li chanted something before casting an incantation seal toward them. All of these centipedes immediately shrank to around the size of a palm each at Han Li's behest. They then opened their mouths to blast out bursts of glacial qi which enshrouded their bodies, sealing themselves in a block of ice. Moments later, a series of remarkably translucent balls of ice appeared before Han Li. Han Li flicked his 10 fingers toward the balls of ice in quick succession, and 12 azure threads shot forth, instantly disappearing into the balls of ice. The 12 ice balls then plummeted downward in unison, disappearing into the ground amid a flash of yellow light. Only then did Han Li nod his head with a satisfied expression. With 12 7th-grade demon beasts guarding this place, even a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't be able to easily destroy the teleportation formation here. As such, he was feeling a lot more reassured. Han Li then immediately activated the teleportation formation beneath his feet and disappeared amid a flash of white light. Following a rush of dizziness, Han Li appeared on an island tens of millions of kilometers away. He swept his gaze around him to find that everything remained the same as they had been during his last visit. It appeared that this place was quite obscure and hadn't been discovered by any other cultivators. Han Li strode out of the teleportation formation and slashed his hand through the air behind him without even turning his head. A streak of golden flashed past, and the teleportation formation behind him was sliced in half amid a resounding boom. Han Li then emerged expressionlessly from within the stone chamber. Moments later, a streak of azure light rose up into the air from the island, then shot forth toward a certain direction and disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. Han Li traveled directly toward Heavenly Star City, passing by a few islands along the way, but he showed no intention of stopping at any of them. However, he soon discovered that all of the cultivators that he encountered along his journey were also all in a rush. If 2 groups of unfamiliar cultivators bumped into one another, both sides would immediately adopt wary expressions, and the atmosphere would become extremely tense. This observation made Han Li's brows furrow, and he could sense the turmoil brewing within the scattered star seas. As he approached the massive island upon which the Heavenly Star City was situated, he saw more and more traveling cultivators. Aside from groups of cultivators locked in tense confrontations, there were even some who were engaged in fierce battles, and it was quite apparent that all of the participants in those battles were not holding back at all, clearly intent on killing their enemies. Letter 1 D487, letter 1 D493, letter 1 D486, letter 1 D486, letter 1 D666C, letter 1 D486, letter 1 D484, letter 1 D4F8, letter 1 D4AT. In the beginning, Han Li paid them no heed. However, as the instances of such battles increased in regularity, Han Li knew that this most likely had something to do with the conflict between the Starfall Coalition and the Star Palace. Even though it appeared that the Starfall Coalition was dominating the battle, the Star Palace had been ruling over the scattered star seas for such a long time, so they had to have some trump cards up their sleeves. Furthermore, they also shared close ties with many of the large sects in the scattered star seas. Those ties were not very apparent under normal circumstances, but those powers would definitely step in when the Star Palace was truly on the cusp of destruction. The fact that there were cultivators who clearly belonged to neither the Star Palace nor the Starfall Coalition participating in the battles seemed to indicate that the Star Palace really was at the end of the road. After all, none of the other major powers would step in unless their intervention was absolutely mandatory. Of course, Han Li wasn't just going to plunge headfirst into the conflict between the Star Palace and the Starfall Coalition without doing some research first. However, it was difficult to acquire any useful information from low-grade cultivators as they simply didn't know much themselves. As such, even though he encountered many Foundation establishment cultivators along the way, he didn't stop to interrogate any of them. On that day, he was hurtling through the air as a streak of azure light when all of a sudden, his expression changed slightly, and he turned toward a certain direction in the distance. He stalled briefly in his flight, before flying toward that direction. With Han Li's current cultivation base, it only took him several flashes while flying at full speed to cover a distance of over 5 kilometers. There he cast his gaze downward, and a hint of a smile appeared on his face. In the air at a lower altitude down below, there was a black-robed elderly man and an intimidating burly man locked in a fierce battle with one another, while manipulating a shimmering yellow flying sword and an azure ring treasure respectively. Coincidentally, these two were both at the mid-core formation stage, and their treasures seemed to be roughly comparable in power as well. As such, they were completely evenly matched. If neither of them had any other treasures or trump cards up their sleeves to vanquish their opponent in one fell swoop, Han Li estimated that it would take them at least most of a day to reach a decisive result in their battle. Furthermore, it didn't appear as if either man would be capable of killing the other, so the battle would most likely conclude with one side fleeing following a close defeat. Han Li's sudden arrival naturally came as quite a surprise to both the elderly man and the burly middle-aged man. They reflexively stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to Han Li with wary expressions on their faces. Both of them swept their spiritual sense toward Han Li, upon which their expressions changed drastically. In order to draw less attention to himself, Han Li had concealed his cultivation base to only the early nascent soul stage. However, that was already enough to intimidate two core formation cultivators. The two of them waved their hands through the air almost in unison to stow away their respective treasures, immediately following which the elderly man hurriedly extended a respectful bow toward Han Li and said, "I am Bai Zun of Fallen Spirit Island. May I have the honor of knowing your esteemed name, senior?" The middle-aged man also extended a respectful bow to Han Li with a fawning expression on his face as he asked, "Do you require our assistance, senior?" Han Li crossed his arms with an indifferent expression and said, "You don't need to know who I am. I haven't been here for many years, so I have some things to ask the two of you." The two men were very relieved to hear that Han Li was merely coming to them for information, and the elderly immediately said, "We'll be sure to tell you everything we know, senior." Han Li nodded upon hearing this, and immediately began to inquire about the events that had taken place in the scattered star seas during the past century. The two men naturally regarded Han Li as a nascent soul stage senior who had been in an extended period of seclusion, and they hurriedly launched into a recount of the past events. Over 100 years ago, the demon beast of the outer seas took over many islands inhabited by humans, and delivered an ultimatum for all human cultivators to vacate themselves from the outer seas. A battle between the humans and the demon beast naturally erupted as a result. Strangely enough, neither the Star Palace nor the Starfall Coalition deployed many cultivators to participate in this battle. Instead, many itinerant cultivators and disciples from smaller sects who were benefiting directly from those islands gathered on a large island where teleportation formations had been set up, and engaged in a fierce battle with the demon beasts. To call it a battle would actually be inaccurate, as in reality, it was just a bunch of human cultivators on a few islands, desperately trying to keep the demon beasts at bay by making use of some of the restrictions on the islands. Cultivators who dared to participate in this battle possessed Foundation establishment stage cultivation bases at a minimum. It was said that tens of thousands of cultivators were gathered, and even when split up, there were still around 5,000 to 6,000 human cultivators on each island. However, as soon as the battle began, all of the islands were completely surrounded by countless low-grade demon beasts, thereby severely denting the morale of the human cultivators, who had initially been brimming with confidence. In the end, the human cultivators only lasted about half a month before all of the islands were conquered by the demon beasts. Apparently, not even a single high-grade metamorphosis stage demon beast had participated in the battle. All of the restrictions on the island had been vanquished by low-grade demon beasts, of which there seemed to be an almost infinite number, and just their efforts alone were enough to conquer all of the islands. In the outer seas, the human cultivators were no match for the demon beasts, so they had no choice but to retreat back to the inner seas, then destroyed all of the teleportation formations leading to the outer seas, and temporarily relinquishing everything they had established there. At that point, the outer star seas had once again become the domain of the demon beasts. Of course, the human cultivators hadn't actually completely given up on the outer star seas. After a few centuries or perhaps even a few millennia of recuperation, the humans were most likely going to return to the outer seas. After all, the countless demon beasts in the outer seas provided a virtually endless supply of demon cores to be harvested, and that was simply far too important of a resource for the cultivators of the scattered star seas to abandon. Another piece of information that Han Li took note of was that the heavenly star sages had passed away several decades ago. However, prior to their deaths, they had invaded the main base of the Starfall Coalition, using the might of their divine essence-effused light to kill several Starfall Coalition nascent soul cultivators. The Archsaint of the Six Paths and Wan Sangu were in a secret chamber, discussing some important matters at the time, and they were forced to emerge and face the Heavenly Star Sages in battle. The two of them had thought that the Heavenly Star Sages were bound to Heavenly Star City, as they couldn't distance themselves from the divine essence-effused mountains, which was why they had been caught completely off guard by this surprise attack. After that, a series of events that stunned the entire scattered star seas unfolded. The Heavenly Star Sages had no intention of engaging the Archsaint of the Six Paths and Wan Sangu in a prolonged battle. Instead, they unleashed some type of secret technique from the get-go, detonating all of the divine essence-effused light that they had arduously cultivated for several centuries at once, creating a doomsday-like explosion that had razed the entire main base of the Starfall Coalition to the ground. The Archsaint of the Six Paths and Wan Sangu were situated closest to the epicenter of the explosion, and even their nascent souls didn't get a chance to escape before they were instantly reduced to nothingness. As such, the most powerful beings of the Star Palace and the Starfall Coalition had been wiped off the face of the world in the blink of an eye. In comparison, the Starfall Coalition had been reduced to a far inferior state compared to the Star Palace. After all, the Archsaint of the Six Paths and Wan Sangu weren't the only ones who had perished during the attack. At the time, there were several elders and a high number of core formation cultivators present at the main base as well, and they had also been killed. As expected, in the following 2 to 3 decades, Ling Yuling took over the Star Palace and forced the Starfall Coalition into a steady decline, making the latter lose a lot of territory in the process. All of the sects that were a part of the Starfall Coalition had been placed on the Star Palace's hit list, so they had no choice but to grit their teeth and try to weather the storm. Otherwise, it was quite possible that the Starfall Coalition would have been disbanded a long time ago. Just as it appeared as if the Starfall Coalition were about to be vanquished, an astonishing event suddenly took place, heralding the resurgence of the Starfall Coalition. The sect master of the myriad gates of enlightenment, Wan Tianming, progressed to the late nascent soul stage amid the crisis, becoming the newest great cultivator on the scattered star seas. As such, the Starfall Coalition was immediately able to turn the tables. As a late nascent soul cultivator, Wan Tianming was able to unite the entire coalition, becoming the undisputed coalition leader. After that, he slew several Star Palace elders in battle and forged a resounding reputation for himself. In the following few decades, the Star Palace was no match for Wan Tianming's aggressive assaults, as they had no great cultivators to stand against him. Thus, the Starfall Coalition stormed back with a vengeance, recovering all of their lost territories, then claiming some more. Soon, the Star Palace had been plunged into an even more perilous situation than when the Archsaint of the Six Paths and Wan Sangu were still alive. Not long ago, the Starfall Coalition had opened up a pathway into the Heavenly Star City and sent out a batch of their ghost crests again. All sects and powers that received the crests had to confirm to whom they pledged their allegiance. If they didn't join the Starfall Coalition in their assault against the Star Palace, then they would be regarded as enemies of the Starfall Coalition and would be eradicated as a result. The Starfall Coalition was all set to attack the Star Palace and were taking no prisoners. Sure enough, Wan Tianming backed up his threat by actually destroying a few sects that were allied with the Star Palace, and the entire scattered star seas was completely riled up as a result. The sects that had pledged their allegiance to the Star Palace and the Starfall Coalition, as well as the sect that simply wanted to take a neutral stance, were all forced to take action. Some of them completely shut off their sects and hid within their restrictions. Some of them fled to the Heavenly Star City for refuge, and there were many that took this opportunity to expand by taking over abandoned territories. In any case, the scattered star seas was in complete turmoil. The Starfall Coalition's army of cultivators took this opportunity to gather on a few islands near the Heavenly Star City, and it appeared that they had deployed all of their most powerful cultivators in preparation for the final battle. It appeared that Wan Tianming didn't want to prolong this battle any longer. He simply wanted to destroy the Star Palace and end this conflict once and for all. However, when was the battle going to commence, and how many cultivators had been gathered on the islands near Heavenly Star City? Neither the elderly man nor the middle-aged man could provide answers to those questions. Most of the cultivators in the scattered star seas wanted nothing better than to avoid this battle altogether, but many of them were simply unable to do so and were forced to take a side. As for whether they had joined the Star Palace or the Starfall Coalition, that was only something that they themselves knew. As such, there were spies all over the place trying to ascertain which side everyone was allied to, plunging the area around the heavenly star city into complete turmoil. Furthermore, it only became more and more chaotic as one approached the heavenly star city. Han Li had heard all of the information he wanted to hear, and he fell into deep thought, sparing the two core formation cultivators from further interrogation. After hearing the information provided by the two core formation cultivators, Han Li was feeling a lot more assured. It was quite clear that Ling Yuling had requested for his help through the use of the Myriad Distance Talisman, so he could oppose the sect master of the Myriad Gates of Enlightenment. Speaking of this Wan Tianming, Han Li had actually seen him in the Heaven Void Hall before. This man had left him with a rather negative impression, and he always appeared as if he were plotting something. However, Han Li was quite surprised to hear that this man was able to reach the late nascent soul stage. The heavenly star sages, who had perished along with the archsaint of the Six Paths in Wan Sangu, would clearly have been unable to anticipate this. In their minds, the Star Palace would have surely already defeated the Starfall Coalition and reigned supreme over the scattered star seas again, so there would be no need to request any external assistance. However, Han Li really didn't see this Wan Tianming as much of a threat. The sect master Wan had progressed to the late nascent soul stage even later than he had, so there was no way that he was a match for Han Li. Following his period of seclusion, Han Li had further bolstered his cultivation base, and his spiritual sense had also become vastly more powerful. Even if he were to come up against a deity transformation cultivator, he had the resources to ensure self-preservation, albeit just barely. With that in mind, Han Li's thoughts quickly turned to the divine essence-effused light, as well as that legendary divine essence-effused mountain. The divine essence-effused light cultivation art wouldn't be difficult to obtain. Apparently, this cultivation art wasn't exactly a well-guarded secret, so he would most likely be able to find a copy somewhere in the scattered star seas. Even without recruiting the assistance of the Star Palace, he would also be able to find it as long as he was willing to expend some time. However, the divine essence-effused mountain was an extraordinary object, and it was difficult to say whether there would even be another mountain of a similar nature in the human world. He didn't know whether this mountain was a mandatory element for cultivating the divine essence-effused light, but many high-grade cultivators in the scattered star seas were aware that the heavenly star sages had only begun using this cultivation art after discovering the divine essence-effused mountain. As such, this mountain was at least very helpful to those cultivating the divine essence-effused light. Otherwise, as aforementioned, this cultivation art was not that difficult to obtain, and far more people would be using it, but that was clearly not the case. With these thoughts racing through his mind, Han Li nodded absent-mindedly toward the two core formation cultivators and left some parting words of gratitude before flying away as a streak of azure light. Throughout this entire process, he hadn't asked anything about why the two were fighting, nor which of the two sides they had pledged their allegiance toward. The two of them stood on the spot and looked on with respectful expressions at Han Li's departing figure. Only after the azure streak of light truly disappeared into the distance did they turn to each other in unison, upon which hints of animosity reappeared in their eyes. However, after Han Li's interruption, neither of the two were in the mood to fight anymore, and after trading a few verbal insults, both of them departed in a rather sheepish manner. At this point, Han Li was already over 50 kilometers away. Over the surface of the ocean, several tens of thousands of kilometers away from the heavenly star city, there were a dozen or so streaks of light hurtling toward the city. This group consisted of cultivators who varied in age, but all of them wore identical attire, so it was quite apparent that they belonged to the same sect or power. Perhaps it was due to the fact that they had gotten close to Heavenly Star City, but hints of complacency had crept onto their faces, and some of them had even begun conversing through voice transmissions. Right at this moment, a sudden turn of events abruptly unfolded. Brilliant white light erupted from the surface of the ocean beneath the group of cultivators, following which a dozen or so pillars of white light shot forth from down below. Following a string of rumbling explosions, all of the cultivators were struck aside from the three core formation cultivators with the highest cultivation bases, who had barely managed to evade the surprise attack just in the nick of time. Howls of anguish immediately erupted, as these people were reduced to nothingness amid the pillars of white light. The three remaining core formation cultivators were naturally shocked and infuriated upon seeing this, and they immediately summoned their respective treasures as they hurriedly cast their eyes downward. Right at this moment, 7 or 8 streaks of light emerged from within the ocean, rising up into the air before surrounding the three core formation cultivators. One of the remaining elderly cultivators seemed to have recognized one of the people that they had been surrounded by, and a resentful expression appeared on his face as he cussed, "Starfall Coalition dogs." A middle-aged man with a set of sinister features chuckled coldly as he asked, "Hee, if it is Brother Lu of the Whitewater Sword Sect, going by your logic, doesn't that make the three of you Star Palace dogs? Also, hasn't your sect declared itself to be completely neutral? Why are you heading to the Heavenly Star Island? HMPH, why do you insist on asking a question you already know the answer to? Our Whitewater Sword Sect has always been a branch of the Star Palace, so it's naturally our duty to provide the Star Palace with our assistance during its time of need. That's enough chit-chat. Let's go." The elderly man aimed a vicious glare at the opposing middle-aged man before barking an instruction to the two core formation cultivators beside him. The three cultivators then swayed and transformed into 3 streaks of light as they flew toward a certain direction. Furthermore, as they rushed away into the distance, the 3 streaks of light suddenly combined into one massive pillar of intertwining red, yellow, and white light several tens of feet in length, sweeping toward the opposing Starfall Coalition cultivators in that direction with astonishing. It appeared that the elderly man knew that his trio would be no match for such a large number of enemies, and he immediately decided to escape. However, the 2 Starfall Coalition cultivators situated in that direction weren't flustered in the slightest at the sight of the oncoming 3-colored pillar of light. Instead, they merely glanced at one another before raising their hands in unison. A vast expanse of azure light suddenly erupted from their hands without any premonition, catching the 3-colored pillar of light completely off guard before ensnaring them within the azure light. The two of them then began to chant something, and azure light flashed as a massive azure net was revealed, trapping the 3 core formation cultivators. All 3 of them were attacking the net with all their might, but were still unable to break free. "Haha, cease your futile struggles, Brother Lu. This all-encompassing net was given to us by an elder of our sect. With your core formation stage cultivation bases, there's no way that you'd be able to break free from it. Besides, even if you did manage to escape, it wouldn't do you any good anyway. The entire Heavenly Star City has been surrounded by our Starfall Coalition, and it'll only be a matter of time before it's vanquished. Allow me to send you 3 on your way first." The middle-aged man chortled as he abruptly opened his mouth. A small white sword shot forth from within, flying directly toward the 3 core formation cultivators trapped within the net. "Oh, from the sounds of it, Heavenly Star City seems to have been surrounded for some time already. Can you tell me about the situation here?" An unfamiliar male voice suddenly rang out nearby, and was clearly audible to everyone present. "Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Who's there?" The middle-aged man's heart jolted with shock as he hurriedly surveyed his surroundings with a wary expression. The other Starfall Coalition cultivators also hurriedly released their spiritual sense, and they also began to look around with bewilderment and caution on their faces. However, their search proved to be completely futile, and all of them could only look at one another with confusion in their eyes. "What are you all looking for? I'm right here, aren't I?" The unfamiliar chuckled coldly, following which azure light flashed in front of the 3 ensnared Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators, and a humanoid figure was revealed. This was an azure-robed young man who appeared to be in his 20s, and he was appraising the Starfall Coalition cultivators around him with an indifferent expression. The 2 Starfall Coalition cultivators closest to the young man swept their spiritual sense toward him, upon which their expressions changed drastically, and they exclaimed in unison, "A nascent soul cultivator." Even though they couldn't ascertain Han Li's exact cultivation base, there was definitely no mistaking the fact that he was a nascent soul cultivator. The middle-aged man's expression also changed upon hearing this. He carefully sized up the young man before him, and a look of astonishment and horror suddenly appeared on his face. Immediately thereafter, he made a hand seal without any hesitation and fled into the distance as a streak of white light. Following just a few flashes, he was already several hundred feet away. Not only was Han Li slightly surprised to see this, the other Starfall Coalition cultivators were also quite flabbergasted. Even if this young man were a nascent soul cultivator, with so many core formation cultivators present, they should still have been able to at least put up a fight. Furthermore, that middle-aged man was the leader of the group, and his cultivation base was the pinnacle of the late core formation stage. So why was he fleeing the scene before they had even verified whether this young man was friend or foe? You recognize me. This young man was naturally none other than Han Li, who had finally gotten here after over a month of intensive traveling. His expression darkened as he casually flicked a finger toward the distance, upon which a red line immediately shot through the air amid a piercing whistling sound. The red line swayed and completely disappeared. Meanwhile, an anguished cry suddenly rang out from within the streak of white light several hundred feet away. The white light dissipated, and a humanoid ball of fire plummeted into the ocean, where it sank like a lead weight. Han Li merely waved a hand through the air in a nonchalant manner, and that same sharp whistling sound erupted again as that red line flashed through the air, disappearing into the Han Li's hand in the blink of an eye. Han Li turned his gaze toward the other cultivators and asked, "Are you willing to answer my questions now?" Even though Han Li's voice wasn't very loud nor deliberately menacing, all of the Starfall Coalition cultivators felt chills run down their spines. Only then did they realize why the middle-aged man fled without so much as a second thought. The man standing before them was clearly unfathomably powerful, and they didn't appear to have any chance of victory even if they were to attack all at once. Most importantly, he seemed to be harboring a lot of enmity toward their Starfall Coalition. With the precedent of the middle-aged man being insta-killed, all of the other Starfall Coalition cultivators were feeling quite weak in the knees, and none of them dared to act recklessly. After a while, a man with a hooked nose cleared his throat and forced a smile onto his face as he asked, "What questions do you have for us, Senior?" "Didn't I already state my question? Do you want me to repeat myself?" Han Li turned toward the man with a cold expression. The hook-nosed man's heart jolted, and his smile stiffened even further as he hurriedly replied, "My apologies, Senior. I'll answer your question right away. The Star Palace has indeed been surrounded by our coalition already. Otherwise, we wouldn't dare to appear in and are so close to the Star Palace." "I see. Looks like your Starfall Coalition decided to attack before the announced date to catch the Starfall Palace off guard. You'll also be able to kill all of the cultivators loyal to the Star Palace in the process. What a great ploy you've devised." A hint of a smile appeared on Han Li's face as he spoke. "I'm not aware of the specific details. Our cultivation bases are not very high, and we only did as we were told," the hook-nosed man replied with a sheepish smile. "But even if the Starfall Coalition has gained the upper hand in this battle, Heavenly Star City is an extremely massive place. Even with tens of thousands of cultivators gathered, there's no way that they'd be able to surround the entire city, right?" Han Li asked. "You're more likely not aware of this, Senior, but Coalition Leader 1 had set up 108 Windfire Copper Pillars, then gathered a few powerful formation spell masters to set up a Heavenly Windfire formation around the island that Heavenly Star City is situated on, and he's using the boundless powers of fire and wind to attack the Star Palace. As long as the Coalition's cultivators can guard the 108 Windfire Pillars, that'll be enough to trap the entirety of Heavenly Star City." The hook-nosed man knew that he would be punished by the Coalition for revealing this information, but the cold glare that Han Li had directed at him had tipped him over the edge, and in his horror, he blurted out this information without thinking. As soon as those words escaped from his mouth, the hook-nosed man was sorely regretting his decision. However, even a core formation cultivator like him was aware of this information, so it clearly wasn't very confidential. With that in mind, he was feeling slightly more relieved. A Heavenly Windfire formation. Han Li stirred slightly upon hearing this. He hadn't ever studied this formation in detail, but many of the formation spell tomes that he had read had mentioned this formation on quite a number of occasions. It was said that in ancient times, there was a restriction formation that could draw upon the powers of fire and wind within this world, and the staggering enormity of this formation was vastly renowned. If the Starfall Coalition had managed to set up such a formation, then there really was a possibility that they could have used it to surround Heavenly Star City. After all, with Wan Tianming guarding the formation core in person, even if the Star Palace cultivators managed to destroy a few Windfire pillars, those pillars could be easily repaired. As long as the formation core remained intact, there was no way to truly destroy the formation. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face. Meanwhile, tension was rolling off the bodies of the Starfall Coalition cultivators in almost palpable waves. It didn't take a genius to be able to tell that Han Li was here to reinforce the Star Palace, so they were in a very perilous situation. In contrast, the three Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators ensnared with the azure net were ecstatic. The elderly man hurriedly yelled, "Senior, we've come here to reinforce the Star Palace, and those people are all cultivators from the Starfall Coalition's Enforcement Division. They've killed countless cultivators who have pledged their allegiance to the Star Palace, and they deserve to die countless deaths for their crimes. Don't let these people live, Senior." All of the Starfall Coalition cultivators' faces paled upon hearing this. The two cultivators who were standing the farthest away from Han Li glanced at one another before flipping over their hands in unison, producing a small yellow flag each. They then immediately tossed those flags into the air, upon which they transformed into two yellow clouds that enshrouded the bodies of the two cultivators. Within the blink of an eye, the two yellow clouds had completely vanished. In the next instant, the yellow clouds appeared over 200 feet away before quickly disappearing again. Teleportation. Han Li's pupils contracted minutely as a hint of surprise appeared on his face. However, a cold chuckle then escaped his mouth as he abruptly raised a hand, feigning a grabbing motion toward the azure net that had ensnared the three Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators. The two Starfall Coalition cultivators controlling the net felt as if a resounding boom had rung out directly in their heads, and they were struck by an intense spell of dizziness. They lost control of the all-encompassing net as a result, and it reverted back into a ball of azure light, allowing the three ensnared cultivators to escape while the net landed in Han Li's hand. Han Li paid no heed to the words of gratitude extended toward him by the three rescued cultivators as white and azure light flashed behind him, materializing a pair of wings on his back. The wings flapped gently, and Han Li disappeared amid a gust of wind. It was quite clear that he had set off in pursuit of the two cultivators who had just teleported away. The remaining Starfall Coalition cultivators were both shocked and elated to see this, and they all glanced at one another before fleeing in different directions. Han Li was an extremely fearsome enemy, so they were certainly not going to take a gamble with their lives and hoped that Han Li would spare them out of the kindness in his heart. However, the three Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators were naturally unwilling to allow their enemies get away. As such, all three of them let loose enraged roars as they also set off in pursuit of the Starfall Coalition cultivators. In the distance, two muffled thumps erupted in midair. Immediately thereafter, white light flashed, and two yellow clouds shot back as if they had been struck by some kind of immense force. A gentle breeze blew past, and Han Li appeared out of thin air, appraising the two yellow clouds nearby with a cold, deriding sneer on his lips. A third inky black eye had appeared over his glabella, and it disappeared again following a flash of black light. The two Starfall Coalition cultivators within the yellow clouds were revealed again with blood-stained robes and extremely pale faces. They both appeared to have been severely wounded, and were in a state of shock and horror. Ever since they had obtained these two yellow sand Buddhist flags, they had managed to use them to escape from nascent soul cultivators on several occasions. As such, they were extremely confident in the ability of this pair of treasures. Otherwise, they wouldn't have dared to flee the scene even after witnessing Han Li's fearsome might. However, Han Li had merely thrown two nonchalant punches through the air, and their confidence had been completely shattered. Only then did they realize that this young man was even more fearsome than they had anticipated. Even so, the two of them certainly weren't going to give up and allow themselves to be killed. Thus, they immediately gritted their teeth and let loose loud cries in unison as they blasted mouthfuls of blood essence into the yellow clouds. The clouds immediately tumbled and surged before turning into a crimson color. The two cultivators then began to join their voices in a chant, clearly preparing to unleash their final trump card. A cold light immediately appeared in Han Li's eyes as he abruptly opened his mouth. Two piercing streaks of yellow light shot forth from within, appearing in front of the crimson clouds in the blink of an eye before instantly puncturing them. Two anguished cries rang out from within the crimson clouds before the two cultivators plummeted toward the sea down below. Right at this moment, Han Li pointed a finger at them expressionlessly. The two small golden swords emerged from thin air again before revolving around the two Starfall Coalition cultivators. Balls of golden light erupted, instantly enshrouding the two cultivators within, following a vast expanse of blood began to rain down from above. and Li didn't even afford the two a chance to unleash their secret technique before putting an end to their lives. Letter 1D557, letter 1D563, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41E, letter 1D604, letter 1D41E, letter 1D680, letter 1D560, letter 1D696. Only then did he wave his hand toward the two crimson clouds. The crimson light on those clouds quickly receded, and they reverted back into yellow clouds before flying toward him. And Li cast two incantation seals, both of which disappeared into the clouds. As the yellow clouds approached him, they transformed into two yellow flags again before being stowed away up his sleeve. These two ancient treasures were quite useful for fleeing from perilous situations. Of course, they served no purpose for him, but they would be extremely valuable for his disciples. After stowing away his two flying swords, Han Li turned his attention toward the rest of the fleeing Starfall Coalition cultivators in a calm and collected manner. During this brief delay, all of them had fled to over 1,000 feet away, and the fast cultivator among them had already become a black dot in the distance. And Li heaved a faint sigh before grabbing onto a spirit beast pouch hanging from his waist and tossing it into the air. A loud burst of buzzing rang out as a swarm of golden beetles emerged from within. The beetles split up into 5 smaller swarms at Han Li's behest before hurtling toward different directions as fast as lightning. Meanwhile, Han Li flipped his palm over, and the two yellow flags appeared again for his inspection. The swarms of golden beetles and the fleeing cultivators disappeared into the distance in the blink of an eye. Not long after that, golden light flashed in the distance again as the swarms of beetles flew back from different directions one after the other. The 3 White Water Sword Sect also flew toward Han Li behind the swarms of beetles, but they were looking at the swarms with horrified and traumatized expressions. It appeared that the 3 of them had just witnessed the gold-devouring beetles devouring living people, and had been greatly shaken by that gruesome visual experience. After Han Li stowed away the beetles into his spirit beast pouch again, the elderly man stepped forward in a respectful manner and said, "Thank you for saving our lives, Senior. If it weren't for your intervention, the 3 of us would most likely be dead by now." "There's no need to thank me. I only saved the 3 of you because I just so happened to be passing by anyway. Now that Heavenly Star City has been surrounded, the 3 of you won't even be able to access the island at your cultivation's bases. You should hurry up and go back. I have no interest in carrying useless baggage while I try to break through that heavenly windfire formation," Han Li replied in an aloof voice. The 3 cultivators knew that Han Li was right, and wry smiles appeared on their faces. As such, after extending some further words of gratitude to Han Li, the 3 of them returned the way they had come. Han Li looked on with narrowed eyes for a while as the 3 cultivators departed before flying toward Heavenly Star City. A journey of several tens of thousands of feet was naturally not a very lengthy one for Han Li. Along the way, he noticed several groups of Starfall Coalition cultivators hidden beneath large rocks or under the surface of the ocean. Even though none of them as powerful as the first group he had encountered, which had 7 or 8 core formation cultivators among their ranks, there were still 2 or 3 high-grade cultivators in each group. These people were clearly stationed here to take care of anyone who managed to escape from the Heavenly Star City. And Li couldn't be bothered to pay any heed to these cultivators. He simply transformed into a faint azure shadow and glided soundlessly through the air above them. None of these Starfall Coalition cultivators were alerted to the fact that they had just brushed shoulders with death. When Han Li was only just over 50 kilometers away from Heavenly Star City, he finally saw some flashes of red light in the distance. After drawing even closer, he discovered that the entire island had been completely enshrouded under a veil-like layer of azure and red light. Furthermore, he could hear the sound of indistinct rumbling akin to thunderclaps coming from the direction of the island. Han Li raised his eyebrows upon making these observations, and he quickly made a series of hand seals, following which the barely visible streak of azure light he had transformed into was completely concealed. At the same time, Han Li decelerated significantly, approaching the island at a much more leisurely pace. After flying for several tens of kilometers, the situation around Heavenly Star City was finally completely revealed to Han Li. There were countless black spots visible on the surface of the ocean in the extremely far distance. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that these were spirit boats of all types of different styles and models. Some of them were as tall as pavilions with intricate carvings running along their hulls, while some were only around 20 feet in length with very crude and simple designs. There was also great diversity in the materials that these boats were constructed from, including light green spiritual wood, pristine and flawless jade, and even some completely pitch-black iron boats that glistened under the sunlight. You're more likely not aware of this, Senior, but Coalition Leader Juan had set up 108 Windfire copper pillars, then gathered a few powerful formation spell masters to set up a heavenly Windfire formation around the island that Heavenly Star City is situated on, and he's using the boundless powers of fire and wind to attack the Star Palace. As long as the Coalition's cultivators can guard the 108 Windfire pillars, that'll be enough to trap the entirety of Heavenly Star City. The hook-nosed man knew that he would be punished by the Coalition for revealing this information, but the cold glare that Han Li had directed at him had tipped him over the edge, and in his horror, he blurted out this information without thinking. As soon as those words escaped from his mouth, the hook-nosed man was sorely regretting his decision. However, even a core formation cultivator like him was aware of this information, so it clearly wasn't very confidential. With that in mind, he was feeling slightly more relieved. A heavenly Windfire formation. Han Li stirred slightly upon hearing this. He hadn't ever studied this formation in detail, but many of the formation spell tomes that he had read had mentioned this formation on quite a number of occasions. It was said that in ancient times, there was a restriction formation that could draw upon the powers of fire and wind within this world, and the staggering enormity of this formation was vastly renowned. If the Starfall Coalition had managed to set up such a formation, then there really was a possibility that they could have used it to surround Heavenly Star City. After all, with Juan Tianming guarding the formation core in person, even if the Star Palace cultivators managed to destroy a few Windfire pillars, those pillars could be easily repaired. As long as the formation core remained intact, there was no way to truly destroy the formation. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face. Meanwhile, tension was rolling off the bodies of the Starfall Coalition cultivators in almost palpable waves. It didn't take a genius to be able to tell that Han Li was here to reinforce the Star Palace, so they were in a very perilous situation. In contrast, the three Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators ensnared with the Azure Net were ecstatic. The elderly man hurriedly yelled, "Senior, we've come here to reinforce the Star Palace, and those people are all cultivators from the Starfall Coalition's Enforcement Division. They've killed countless cultivators who have pledged their allegiance to the Star Palace, and they deserve to die countless deaths for their crimes. Don't let these people live, Senior." All of the Starfall Coalition cultivators' faces paled upon hearing this. The two cultivators who were standing the farthest away from Han Li glanced at one another before flipping over their hands in unison, producing a small yellow flag each. They then immediately tossed those flags into the air, upon which they transformed into two yellow clouds that enshrouded the bodies of the two cultivators. Within the blink of an eye, the two yellow clouds had completely vanished. In the next instant, the yellow clouds appeared over 200 feet away before quickly disappearing again. Teleportation. Han Li's pupils contracted minutely as a hint of surprise appeared on his face. However, a cold chuckle then escaped his mouth as he abruptly raised a hand, feigning a grabbing motion toward the azure net that had ensnared the three Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators. The two Starfall Coalition cultivators controlling the net felt as if a resounding boom had rung out directly in their heads, and they were struck by an intense spell of dizziness. They lost control of the all-encompassing net as a result, and it reverted back into a ball of azure light, allowing the three ensnared cultivators to escape while the net landed in Han Li's hand. Han Li paid no heed to the words of gratitude extended toward him by the three rescued cultivators as white and azure light flashed behind him, materializing a pair of wings on his back. The wings flapped gently, and Han Li disappeared amid a gust of wind. It was quite clear that he had set off in pursuit of the two cultivators who had just teleported away. The remaining Starfall Coalition cultivators were both shocked and elated to see this, and they all glanced at one another before fleeing in different directions. Han Li was an extremely fearsome enemy, so they were certainly not going to take a gamble with their lives and hoped that Han Li would spare them out of the kindness in his heart. However, the three Whitewater Sword Sect cultivators were naturally unwilling to allow their enemies get away. As such, all three of them let loose enraged roars as they also set off in pursuit of the Starfall Coalition cultivators. In the distance, two muffled thumps erupted in midair. Immediately thereafter, white light flashed, and two yellow clouds shot back as if they had been struck by some kind of immense force. A gentle breeze blew past, and Han Li appeared out of thin air, appraising the two yellow clouds nearby with a cold, deriding sneer on his lips. A third inky black eye had appeared over his glabella, and it disappeared again following a flash of black light. The two Starfall Coalition cultivators within the yellow clouds were revealed again with blood-stained robes and extremely pale faces. They both appeared to have been severely wounded, and were in a state of shock and horror. Ever since they had obtained these two yellow sand Buddhist flags, they had managed to use them to escape from nascent soul cultivators on several occasions. As such, they were extremely confident in the ability of this pair of treasures. Otherwise, they wouldn't have dared to flee the scene even after witnessing Han Li's fearsome might. However, Han Li had merely thrown two nonchalant punches through the air, and their confidence had been completely shattered. Only then did they realize that this young man was even more fearsome than they had anticipated. Even so, the two of them certainly weren't going to give up and allow themselves to be killed. Thus, they immediately gritted their teeth and let loose loud cries in unison as they blasted mouthfuls of blood essence into the yellow clouds. The clouds immediately tumbled and surged before turning into a crimson color. The two cultivators then began to join their voices in a chant, clearly preparing to unleash their final trump card. A cold light immediately appeared in Han Li's eyes as he abruptly opened his mouth. Two piercing streaks of yellow light shot forth from within, appearing in front of the crimson clouds in the blink of an eye before instantly puncturing them. Two anguished cries rang out from within the crimson clouds before the two cultivators plummeted toward the sea down below. Right at this moment, Han Li pointed a finger at them expressionlessly. The two small golden swords emerged from thin air again before revolving around the two Starfall Coalition cultivators. Balls of golden light erupted, instantly enshrouding the two cultivators within, following a vast expanse of blood began to rain down from above. Han Li didn't even afford the two a chance to unleash their secret technique before putting an end to their lives. Only then did he wave his hand toward the two crimson clouds. The crimson light on those clouds quickly receded, and they reverted back into yellow clouds before flying toward him. Han Li cast two incantation seals, both of which disappeared into the clouds. As the yellow clouds approached him, they transformed into two yellow flags again before being stowed away up his sleeve. These two ancient treasures were quite useful for fleeing from perilous situations. Of course, they served no purpose for him, but they would be extremely valuable for his disciples. After stowing away his two flying swords, Han Li turned his attention toward the rest of the fleeing Starfall Coalition cultivators in a calm and collected manner. During this brief delay, all of them had fled to over 1,000 feet away, and the fast cultivator among them had already become a black dot in the distance. Han Li heaved a faint sigh before grabbing onto a spirit beast pouch hanging from his waist and tossing it into the air. A loud burst of buzzing rang out as a swarm of golden beetles emerged from within. The beetles split up into 5 smaller swarms at Han Li's behest before hurtling toward different directions as fast as lightning. Meanwhile, Han Li flipped his palm over, and the two yellow flags appeared again for his inspection. The swarms of golden beetles and the fleeing cultivators disappeared into the distance in the blink of an eye. Not long after that, golden light flashed in the distance again as the swarms of beetles flew back from different directions one after the other. The 3 White Water Sword Sect also flew toward Han Li behind the swarms of beetles, but they were looking at the swarms with horrified and traumatized expressions. It appeared that the 3 of them had just witnessed the gold-devouring beetles devouring living people, and had been greatly shaken by that gruesome visual experience. After Han Li stowed away the beetles into his spirit beast pouch again, the elderly man stepped forward in a respectful manner and said, "Thank you for saving our lives, Senior. If it weren't for your intervention, the 3 of us would most likely be dead by now." "There's no need to thank me. I only saved the 3 of you because I just so happened to be passing by anyway. Now that Heavenly Star City has been surrounded, the 3 of you won't even be able to access the island at your cultivation's bases. You should hurry up and go back. I have no interest in carrying useless baggage while I try to break through that heavenly windfire formation," Han Li replied in an aloof voice. The 3 cultivators knew that Han Li was right, and wry smiles appeared on their faces. As such, after extending some further words of gratitude to Han Li, the 3 of them returned the way they had come. Han Li looked on with narrowed eyes for a while as the 3 cultivators departed before flying toward Heavenly Star City. A journey of several tens of thousands of feet was naturally not a very lengthy one for Han Li. Along the way, he noticed several groups of Starfall Coalition cultivators hidden beneath large rocks or under the surface of the ocean. Even though none of them as powerful as the first group he had encountered, which had 7 or 8 core formation cultivators among their ranks, there were still 2 or 3 high-grade cultivators in each group. These people were clearly stationed here to take care of anyone who managed to escape from the Heavenly Star City. And Li couldn't be bothered to pay any heed to these cultivators. He simply transformed into a faint azure shadow and glided soundlessly through the air above them. None of these Starfall Coalition cultivators were alerted to the fact that they had just brushed shoulders with death. When Han Li was only just over 50 kilometers away from Heavenly Star City, he finally saw some flashes of red light in the distance. After drawing even closer, he discovered that the entire island had been completely enshrouded under a veil-like layer of azure and red light. Furthermore, he could hear the sound of indistinct rumbling akin to thunderclaps coming from the direction of the island. Han Li raised his eyebrows upon making these observations, and he quickly made a series of hand seals, following which the barely visible streak of azure light he had transformed into was completely concealed. At the same time, Han Li decelerated significantly, approaching the island at a much more leisurely pace. After flying for several tens of kilometers, the situation around Heavenly Star City was finally completely revealed to Han Li. There were countless black spots visible on the surface of the ocean in the extremely far distance. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that these were spirit boats of all types of different styles and models. Some of them were as tall as pavilions with intricate carvings running along their hulls, while some were only around 20 feet in length with very crude and simple designs. There was also great diversity in the materials that these boats were constructed from, including light green spiritual wood, pristine and flawless jade, and even some completely pitch-black iron boats that glistened under the sunlight. These spirit boats were all positioned around 3 gargantuan pillars that extended over 1,000 feet up into the sky. Each pillar was entirely yellow in color with azure and red light rippling like water over their surfaces. These streams of azure and red light were pouring upward relentlessly, and they were clearly responsible for maintaining the veil of light enshrouding the entire island. Han Li knew that these massive pillars were most definitely the legendary Windfire pillars, and the Starfall Coalition cultivators in those spirit boats down below had clearly been deployed here to guard the pillars. From a rough visual estimation, Han Li determined that there were about 2,000 to 3,000 cultivators down below. In order to avoid raising the alarm, he refrained from using his spiritual sense to ascertain their numbers. However, he was certain that there were definitely nascent soul cultivators among their ranks. As for whether the sect master of the myriad gates of enlightenment was also there, that was something that only the heavens knew. However, there were a total of 108 Windfire pillar, so surely he couldn't just happen to be situated near one of these 3, right? If this sect master Wan really were in the general vicinity and tried to stop him, Han Li didn't know whether that would count as bad luck for him or for Wan Tianming. Heavenly Windfire Formation was an extremely renowned and powerful formation, but according to Han Li's knowledge, this massive formation had been invented with the purpose of attacking large sects in mind. As such, it was extremely effective against large numbers of normal mid-grade and low-grade cultivators, but it wasn't particularly effective in the face of individual high-grade cultivators. At his current power level, it would only be slightly troublesome at most for him to bypass this formation, and there was no way that it would actually be able to trap him. Han Li stood in midair and hesitated for a long while. He then cast his gaze toward a certain direction in the distance, turning his attention away from the spirit boats and 3 pillars directly before him, and flying toward the veil of azure and red light instead. At this moment, there was a 3-story ship floating on the surface of the ocean at the foot of one of the pillars. The ship was extremely large and had been entirely crafted from beautiful green jade, thereby creating a spectacle of mesmerizing beauty to behold. In the highest level of the ship, there were several cultivators seated around a square jade table, chatting about something with smiles on their faces. There were a few plates of rare spirit fruits placed on the jade table, and all of the cultivators seated around the table appeared to be quite carefree and relaxed. A white-robed scholar at the table turned to the elderly man sitting across from him, and he smiled as he asked, "Senior Long, I heard that if we can conquer the Star Palace this time, Coalition leader Wan would agree to hand over one of the 3 spirit islands of the myriad gates of enlightenment, the Heavenly Fortune Island, to your Golden Lotus sect. Is that true?" The elderly man glared at the scholar out of the corners of his eyes and replied, "You sure are quite well informed, nephew Ning. Fellow Taoist Wan did indeed make that promise to me. The spirit vein on the Heavenly Fortune Island is superior to the one on the island I'm currently residing on, so relocating there will be very beneficial for our sect's future development." A gray-robed, middle-aged Taoist priest chuckled. "Indeed, the Heavenly Fortune Island is quite renowned throughout the entire scattered star seas for the quality of its spirit vein. On top of that, the island produces many types of rare spirit herbs as well, so it'll only be a matter of time for your Golden Lotus sect to rise to another level following the relocation. Speak for yourself, fellow Taoist Hua. Weren't you also given a dozen or so types of rare materials? Otherwise, why would an old reclusive monster like you decide to come out and offer Brother Wan your assistance?" The elderly man replied with a nonchalant smile. Among the three people on the top level of the ship, two were early nascent soul cultivators. The white-robed scholar was only a late-core formation cultivator, but he was speaking to the other two in a manner that was neither haughty nor humble, so it was quite clear that he was not just some ordinary late-core formation cultivator, either. The middle-aged man smiled upon hearing this, and was just about to say something again, when a low ringing sound rang out from the windfire pillar closest to them. The red and azure light that it was releasing also began to tremor violently, as if it were being struck by an invisible force. "Someone's trying to break through the formation," the Taoist priest exclaimed as he immediately rose to his feet. The elderly man and the scholar also stirred slightly as they also stood up and turned their attention toward the massive pillar. The Taoist priest summoned a formation plate and made a hand seal before quickly pointing his finger several times in quick succession. "The attack is coming from the southwestern direction. Wait a minute, it's someone trying to come in rather than get out. Those guards are so useless." Azure light flashed around the elderly man's body, following which an azure carriage suddenly appeared. A sinister smile appeared on his face as he said, "Let's go, fellow Taoist Hua." Seeing as the invader was able to bypass the guards and dares to try and break through the heavenly windfire formation, they're definitely no ordinary person. This place isn't very far away from where the attack is taking place, and with the power of the windfire formation standing in his way, there's no way that he'll be able to immediately gain access to Heavenly Star City. "I'll be in your care, then, Brother Long." The middle-aged Taoist priest immediately strode into the carriage without any hesitation. The elderly man cast an incantation seal onto the carriage, and its entire structure was immediately enshrouded under a ball of azure light. The carriage shuddered before disappearing in the veil of red and azure light nearby, as if it had truly merged as one with the formation. The jade carriage was flashing through the red and azure light at an astonishing speed without any impediment, and the middle-aged Taoist priest standing in the carriage stroked his beard as he praised, "Amazing. I've heard many great things about your heavenly wind carriage, but I didn't think it would attain such an incredible ability here in this windfire formation. Tusk, it seems that Brother Wan must have been aware of your carriage's ability, which is why he organized for you to guard such an important location." Perhaps that's indeed the case. Although ever since fellow Taoist Wan progressed to the late nascent soul stage, his thoughts and intentions have become more and more unpredictable to the likes of you and me. The elderly man replied with a nonchalant smile. The middle-aged Taoist priest smiled upon hearing this, but gave no reply. The heavenly wind carriage beneath their feet was traveling far faster than even a normal mid-nascent soul cultivator was capable of, and under the guidance of the tracking formation plate in the elderly man's hand, they had traveled several tens of kilometers in what seemed like just a few moments. "Take care now, that person is just up ahead. They seem to have broken through most of the formation already and are about to completely escape from the powers of fire and wind, so they must be quite powerful." The elderly man stared at the formation plate in his hand, and a grave expression appeared on his face for the very first time. Before the Taoist priest had a chance to respond, he immediately made a hand seal and began to chant something. Brilliant azure spiritual light erupted from the jade carriage, making the entire carriage and its passengers blurry and indistinct. In the blink of an eye, they had completely disappeared into the veil of red and azure light. The elderly man had unleashed a secret technique to conceal himself and the Taoist priest. As such, they would be able to survey the situation from the shadows before deciding whether they should attack or retreat. The middle-aged Taoist priest nodded in approval at this course of action. The two of them refrained from using their spiritual sense as the jade carriage rose into the air, decelerating significantly in the process. After flying for a few more kilometers, the two of them finally caught sight of the person attempting to break through the formation in the distance, upon which expressions of surprise appeared on both of their faces. The cultivator attacking the formation appeared to be absurdly young. He seemed to be a young man in his 20s. Furthermore, he hadn't summoned any treasures and had only manifested a layer of protective azure light around his body. Despite that, he was able to fly through the red and azure light at a consistent pace, and the process seemed as easy to him as if he were taking a stroll in the park. "Who is that? Could it be that he's a mid-nascent soul cultivator?" the elderly man exclaimed. If any other high-grade cultivators from the Starfall Coalition had been in the same position as these two, they would have immediately been able to identify Han Li. Due to the incident surrounding the Heaven Void Cauldron, Han Li's portrait had been spread all over the scattered star seas. Even though so many years had passed, all cultivators had astonishing memories, so there was no way that they would have failed to recognize him. However, unfortunately for these two, they were nascent soul cultivators whom Wan Tianming had recruited from outside the Starfall Coalition. Even though the respective sects they belonged to were also quite powerful, they were almost constantly in seclusion, so they knew very little about what was happening in the scattered star seas. If it weren't for the fact that Wan Tianming had offered them extremely lucrative remunerations, they most likely would have declined to participate in this battle. As such, the two of them were completely unfamiliar with Han Li and were quite bewildered as a result. Even so, the elderly man and the Taoist priest weren't actually fearful toward Han Li. If they were to join forces, they would be able to put up a fight even against a mid-nascent soul cultivator. Furthermore, their enemy may not even be a mid-nascent soul cultivator. No matter how little they kept up with current affairs, they were still aware of all of the old monsters on the scattered star seas who were at the mid-nascent soul stage above. As such, rather deciding to retreat, the elderly man continued to approach Han Li, confident in his Jade carriage's ability to shield them from Han Li's detection. When the two of them soundlessly reached a spot in the air around 300 feet above Han Li, the two cultivators carefully appraised him again. They discovered that Han Li had a set of mundane facial features and was wearing a nondescript azure robe. Aside from the storage pouches and spirit beast pouches hanging from his waist, there was nothing about him that caught their eyes, and it was impossible to determine his origins. The elderly man's brows furrowed as he turned toward the middle-aged Taoist priest with an inquisitive look. The Taoist priest only hesitated momentarily before slowly nodding his head. Thus, the two of them laid their hands on their respective storage pouches at the same time, taking a deep breath in unison as they prepared to unleash a devastating surprise attack. However, right at this moment, Han Li suddenly raised his head and smiled up at them. A pair of white and azure wings appeared on his back, and he abruptly disappeared following a gentle flap of those wings. The two cultivators were extremely alarmed by this sight. They were able to reach the nascent soul stage, so they naturally weren't ordinary cultivators, and the elderly man immediately decided to abort the attempt to unleash a surprise attack as he hurriedly stomped down upon the Jade carriage underfoot, pouring his magic power into the carriage in a panicked frenzy. The carriage's concealment technique was immediately dispelled, while a ball of piercing azure light appeared, enshrouding both cultivators as well as the carriage. Meanwhile, the middle-aged Taoist priest hurriedly pulled out a black and white yin-yang mirror from his storage pouch before tossing it into the air. Almost at the exact same moment, an azure arc of lightning flashed in the air above the Jade carriage, upon which Han Li appeared out of thin air before immediately sweeping a sleeve through the air. Several tens of small golden swords shot forth from within, transforming into streaks of golden light that rained down from above. "Break!" the middle-aged Taoist priest yelled as his expression changed drastically. As he did so, he pointed a finger toward the yin-yang mirror overhead. A pillar of black and white immediately shot forth from the surface of the mirror, before transforming into clumps of thin threads that attempted to ensnare the golden streaks of light. A string of resounding booms erupted as threads, and the golden light clashed, and the black and white threads were severed with ease as if they were delicate strands of silk. The Taoist priest's heart jolted with shock, and before he had a chance to react, the flying sword had already struck the azure ball of light around the carriage. The same thing happened again. The azure light was only able to withstand these streaks of golden light for a brief moment before being completely punctured, and the golden light continued onward, having barely been slowed down at all by the obstacles thrown at them. The elderly man and the Dietz priest were truly petrified now. The two of them rose into the air at the same time, abandoning the jade carriage beneath their feet as they fled through the air in different directions. One was an azure streak of light, and the other as a white streak of light. In the blink of an eye, they were already over 100 feet away and had just barely managed to evade the small golden swords. As the middle-aged Taoist priest hurtled into the distance, he patted one of the spirit beast pouches hanging from his waist, and a clear cry erupted from within as a snowy white bird around a foot in size emerged. The bird had a pair of green eyes, a sharp crimson beak, and a pair of black talons. The Taoist priest was feeling greatly reassured after summoning this bird, and he reached into his sleeve before producing a crimson badge. There was red light shimmering over the badge, and a dense bunch of runes could also be seen on its surface. Before he had a chance to activate this badge, spatial fluctuations proliferated forth from the air above him, following which Han Li emerged from an arc of azure lightning. He turned his gaze toward the Taoist priest down below, and harumphed coldly as brilliant blue eyes radiated from his eyes. The Taoist priest was naturally greatly alarmed and immediately tried to activate the treasure in his hand. However, he suddenly felt as if his spiritual sense had been viciously pricked by a sharp object, and he was suddenly afflicted by a splitting headache. A cry of pain immediately escaped his mouth as blood began to trickle out from his ears and nostrils, and he almost dropped the badge in his hand in his agony. Han Li took advantage of this opportunity to flick his 5 fingers in quick succession, sending 5 red threads flashing through the air. Meanwhile, green light flashed in his other hand, and a green wooden ruler emerged, which he gently waved it toward the snowy white bird. Crimson flames hurtled through the air, and threads punctured the middle-aged Taoist priest's body. The threads then wound themselves around him, transforming into 5 thick fiery ropes that rendered him completely immobile. Only then did the Taoist priest return to his senses in the aftermath of his excruciating headache, and his face immediately turned deathly pale as he realized the desperate situation that he was in. He was completely unable to move, and he hurriedly summoned his spirit bird to come and rescue him using his spiritual sense, but it completely ignored his orders. The Taoist priest was feeling extremely alarmed as he turned his attention toward the spirit bird, only to find that a silver lotus flower had appeared above its head. 7-colored Buddhist light was emanating from the lotus flower, enshrouding the spirit bird's entire body and completely immobilizing it as well. A wave of shock and fury surged through the Taoist priest's heart, and before he had a chance to think out of this dire situation, a gentle breeze swept over his head, and a streak of golden light came crashing down like lightning from above. The Taoist priest could only cry out in despair before he was decapitated by the golden light. Letter 1D627, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 212F, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D4B8, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. Han Li's body reappeared amid the gust of wind, and he immediately raised both hands into the air at the same time. Loud thunderclaps rang out as a vast expanse of golden lightning arcs shot forth, interweaving with one another to form a golden net. The entire net was shimmering with golden light and creating a raucous commotion as it ensnared the Taoist priest's headless body. Han Li then began to chant something, and scorching flames suddenly erupted from the ropes binding the Taoist priest's body. Bursts of crimson flames shot forth immediately thereafter, instantly reducing the body to a pile of ashes. However, almost at the exact same moment, the Taoist priest's nascent soul emerged from the flames within a ball of white light. It was holding a white scepter in its hands, and was desperately attempting to flee into the distance. However, it crashed headfirst into the golden lightning net, upon which it was rebounded amid a string of rumbling thunderclaps. Brilliant golden light then radiated forth as the golden net exploded violently, and the nascent soul was instantly reduced to nothingness amid the devastating explosion. Only then did Han Li exhale gently as he turned toward another direction with a cold light in his eyes. At this moment, the elderly man had already fled to over 400 feet away, and he had pulled out a pair of azure bowls from a storage pouch hanging from his waist. He hadn't even made up his mind about whether he wanted to attack Han Li yet, and the Taoist priest was already dead. The elderly man's heart immediately sank upon seeing this, and he felt as if his entire body had been plunged into a glacial pit. As Han Li swept his gaze toward the elderly man, the latter suddenly raised an arm, and a burst of azure light flashed as he used the sharp edge of one of his bowls to dismember one of his own arms. The amputated arm exploded amid a loud thump, and the resulting blood mist enshrouded the elderly man's entire body as a blood-curdling shriek rang out. The blood around the elderly man's body transformed him into a faint crimson shadow, which hurtled rapidly into the distance. Following just a few flashes, the crimson shadow had already covered a distance of over 1,000 feet, and the speed of its movement was rather astonishing, even to Han Li. Han Li's eyes narrowed, and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. During that split-second delay, the crimson shadow completely disappeared into the distance. Han Li stroked his chin and shook his head, as a slightly forlorn look appeared on his face. It appeared that this man had mastered a movement technique similar to the bloodshadow evasion technique. In that case, Han Li was reluctant to expend the time and effort required to chase him down. His top priority was to get to Heavenly Star City as quickly as possible, after all. With that in mind, he turned his attention to the spirit bird, which was still trapped under the silver lotus flower conjured up by the eight spirit ruler. He flicked a finger through the air, and a golden sword shot forth, instantly slicing the bird in half and putting an end to its life. This was a spirit beast that had been nurtured by the Taoist priest's blood from birth, so there was no way for it to be tamed by anyone else. As such, Han Li naturally wasn't going to let it live. After that, he transformed into a streak of azure light again, as he flew directly toward Heavenly Star City. On this occasion, he was flying at full speed, and it only took him around 10 minutes to pass through the Heavenly Windfire Formation's restriction. Han Li's body faltered slightly as he broke through the formation, and he paused in his flight as he looked on at Heavenly Star City from afar. There in the distance, the city's gargantuan walls had been enshrouded under a dense barrier of faint blue light. In the air above the light barrier, there were large swaths of red and azure light striking down upon it relentlessly. As the lights of different colors intertwined with one another, earth-shattering thunderclaps rang out incessantly. Upon seeing this, Han Li no longer hesitated any longer as he resumed his journey toward the Heavenly Star City. After just a few flashes, the azure streak of light had reached one of the city gates, but his progress was stalled by that blue light barrier. The Star Palace cultivator behind the light barrier had naturally also caught sight of Han Li, and a loud whistle rang out as a dozen or so Star Palace cultivators of different heights appeared above the city wall, all of whom were appraising Han Li with grave and bewildered expressions. The Starfall Coalition had set up the Heavenly Windfire Formation to prevent people from being able to escape from Heavenly Star City, yet Han Li had gone to all this trouble to break through the restriction and enter from the outside. That was simply inexplicable to them. Even though Han Li was still extremely far away from the city, he could clearly see the expressions on the faces of the Star Palace cultivators through the use of his bright-sight spirit eyes. As such, he wasted no time with words, flipping over his palm instead to produce the Star Palace Guest Elder badge he had received from Wen Qing over a century ago. He raised his hand, and the badge slowly flew toward the light barrier, where it remained hovering in midair. The sight of this badge created quite a stir among the cultivators above the city gates. Several of the more powerful cultivators were appraising the badge with their brows furrowed tightly in confusion, when one of them suddenly seemed to have come to an abrupt realization. An enlightened expression abruptly appeared on his face as he turned to his companions and said something. Expressions of surprise immediately appeared on the faces of the other cultivators, and one of them hurriedly pulled out a flag before waving it several times toward the blue light barrier. The light barrier swayed, and the badge flew into the barrier as a streak of yellow light. Following a few flashes, it emerged on the other side of the barrier as if it had passed through nothing but empty air. Han Li looked on with an aloof expression as he hovered before the light barrier. At this point, all of the cultivators above the city gates had seen the Guest Elder badge, and expressions of surprise and elation had appeared on all of their faces. One of them pointed at Han Li and said something before pulling a voice transmission talisman out from his storage pouch. He swept a hand through the air, and the talisman transformed into a streak of light as it flew into the city. He then produced a treasure that resembled a formation plate and pointed his finger at it a few times before asking, "Is that you, Senior Han? Please forgive us for our insolence. As you can see, we're in a time of crisis here, and none of us have ever met you in person before, so we can't allow you into the city. However, I've already sent a voice transmission talisman to our palace master, and she'll arrive here shortly." The man's words completely disregarded the blue light barrier and traveled directly into Han Li's ears. Han Li raised his eyebrows upon hearing this, but he merely nodded in response and waited with his hands clasped behind his back. Not long after that, 3 streaks of light flew out rapidly from within the city before stopping atop the city gates. The trio was comprised of 2 men and a woman, and the woman was standing at the center, indicating that she was the leader of the group. The woman was extremely gorgeous, and her facial features struck Han Li with a sense of familiarity. It was none other than Ling Yuling, after reverting back to her female appearance. Accompanying her were a yellow-robed man who appeared to be in his 30s, as well as an elderly man with a head of white hair and a white beard. The three of them all had their eyes trained firmly on Han Li. The cultivators guarding the city gates all stood off to the side with respectful expressions, not even daring to breathe too loudly. An elated expression illuminated Ling Yuling's beautiful features as she commanded, "It really is fellow Taoist Han. I thought that he wouldn't be able to get here. Hurry up and let brother Han into the city." "Palace Master, is that a good idea? Is that man really reliable? We'd be in big trouble if he turned out to be a Starfall Coalition cultivator in disguise." The yellow-robed cultivator dissuaded with a hesitant look on his face. Ling Yuling shook her head firmly and replied, "Don't worry, this guest elder badge is completely unique in this world, so there's no mistaking it. Furthermore, with his extraordinary powers, there's no one in the scattered star seas who would be able to take the badge from him." Upon hearing this, the yellow-robed cultivator could only nod in silence. Thus, the cultivators guarding the city gates immediately sprang into action. All of them summoned either a formation flag or a formation plate before tossing them into the air in unison. Lights of various different colors appeared before the formation tools, disappearing into the light barrier in front of the city gates. The brightness of the blue light barrier immediately increased, following which a circular passageway around 10 feet in diameter appeared. Han Li briefly examined the passageway that had opened up in front of him before flying into it as a streak of azure light appeared on the other side in the blink of an eye. The light barrier shuttered again, and the passageway disappeared. Ling Yuling turned to Han Li with an elated smile on her face as she said, "Fellow Taoist Han, you're finally here. I made a promise to your parents, so I certainly couldn't ignore your request for help in your time of need," Han Li replied with a smile. "I'm extremely grateful for your assistance, Brother Han. With you here, there's no need for us to fear those Starfall Coalition clowns. This is not the place to talk. Come with me to the sacred mountain, fellow Taoist Han. Elder Son, inform all of the elders who aren't currently on duty to gather at the sacred palace. I have important matters to discuss with them." Ling Yuling extended an invitation to Han Li before issuing some instructions to the yellow-robed cultivator beside her. "Yes, Palace Master." The yellow-robed cultivator was an early nascent soul cultivator, and as soon as Han Li had passed through the light barrier, he had tried to ascertain Han Li's cultivation base using his spiritual sense. What he discovered was that Han Li's cultivation base was completely unfathomable to him, and a hint of awe and veneration intermingled with shock appeared on his face. After hearing Ling Yuling's orders, he immediately cupped his fist in a salute before pulling out a stack of voice transmission talisman to inform the Star Palace elders of the Palace Master's instructions. At this moment, Han Li turned toward the white-haired elderly man and said, "Long time no see, fellow Taoist Zhao. You're looking quite well. Not only that, but your cultivation base has also improved drastically. I must congratulate you." The elderly man was none other than the very same Elder Zhao who had approached Han Li with that dual cultivation proposal on Silver Shark Island. It had been more than a century since Han Li had last seen him, and he had reached the mid-nascent soul stage as well, just as Ling Yuling had. However, a wry smile appeared on Elder Zhao's face upon hearing this, indicating that there were some hidden circumstances involved behind his breakthrough. I wouldn't have been able to take this step by myself. It's all thanks to the two former palace masters that I was able to take another strike in my cultivation base." "Oh, I see." A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face after hearing this. "So you and Elder Zhao are old acquaintances as well. I'm glad to see that. Let's head to the sacred palace first, and we'll continue our conversation there," Ling Yuling suggested with a smile. Han Li naturally had no objections to this, and he nodded in response. Thus, the group rose into the air and flew toward the sacred mountain at the center of Heavenly Star City. Under the guidance of Ling Yuling and the others, Han Li flew directly toward the highest level of the sacred mountain, before descending in front of what appeared to be a very nondescript bluestone palace. Han Li appraised the stone palace with a hint of surprise on his face. "Do you find our sacred palace to be too mundane, Brother Han?" Ling Yuling turned to Han Li with a dainty smile. "It's indeed not what I was expecting." Han Li made no effort to deny this. "It does indeed look quite ordinary, but all of our past palace masters have cultivated here before, so it was preserved, and is regarded as one of the most important places in our star palace. We normally wouldn't let outsiders set foot into this palace, but you came from afar to help us in our time of need, so you're naturally exempt from this rule, Brother Han, Ling Yuling explained with a smile. The palace itself does look quite mundane, but there's a remarkable abundance of spiritual qi in the surrounding area, so it's an exceptional place to cultivate in. I doubt there would be many islands on the inner star seas that could provide a cultivation environment comparable to this one. Han Li nodded in response. Ling Yuling's smile widened upon hearing this, and she immediately led Han Li toward the gates of the stone palace. The dozen or so star palace disciples guarding the gate hurriedly extended respectful bows toward their group, and all of them wore rather curious expressions at the sight of Han Li. Ling Yuling naturally wasn't going to waste time providing an explanation to these guards as she led Han Li into the palace. Their group filed into a short corridor before arriving in an antiquated hall, where all of them took a seat. Brother Han, you must have learned about our star palace's situation on your way here, right? Ling Yuling cut straight to the point. Of course, it appears that the star palace is in a rather perilous situation, Han Li replied calmly. Letter 1D41F, letter 1D69B, letter 1D556, letter 1D680, letter 1D568, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D41C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D5FA. And I suppose you're also aware of the fact that our star palace had initially gained the upper hand, and we've only been plunged into this situation because that Wan Tianming suddenly reached the late nascent soul stage. Only after he became a great cultivator did the Starfall Coalition manage to turn the tables, so he is the key in this battle. Brother Han, as long as you can hold off that man, I'm confident that our star palace would be able to destroy the Starfall Coalition again. A cold look appeared in Ling Yuling's eyes as she spoke. So you want me to fight that sect Master Wan? Han Li asked. Ling Yuling faltered slightly, and a hesitant look appeared on her face as she asked, Are you unhappy with that arrangement, Brother Han? Han Li raised an eyebrow and replied, It's not that. I just think there seems to be a misunderstanding here, Fairy Ling. A misunderstanding? Could it be that you're not here to help me, Brother Han? Ling Yuling's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. Of course I'm here to help you, it's just that. Han Li was just about to explain when his words came to a halt, and he suddenly turned toward the entrance of the hall. Ling Yuling naturally also cast her gaze toward the same direction. Moments later, 3 cultivators strode into palace, one of which was a mid-nascent soul cultivator, while the other 2 were at the early nascent soul stage. The mid-nascent soul cultivator was a purple-robed man with a pockmarked face. After entering the hall, he refrained from extending a salute toward Ling Yuling, and instead turned toward Han Li with an unfriendly expression, giving off a rather uncouth and antagonistic demeanor. However, his pupils immediately contracted as he swept his spiritual sense toward Han Li, and his expression became quite strained. At this moment, Ling Yuling smiled and said, Elder Ma, I didn't think you'd get here so quickly. Have a seat. When all of the other elders get here as well, I'll introduce to everyone an esteemed guest of our star palace. Indeed, I can sense that this fellow Taoist possesses an unfathomable cultivation base, so a warm welcome is very much necessary. The purple-robed man quickly composed himself before giving Han Li a forced smile and taking a seat. After assessing Han Li's cultivation base, he was clearly a lot more subdued than he was just a second ago. The other 2 Star Palace elders were naturally unable to identify Han Li's cultivation base, but the purple-robed man's reaction told them everything they needed to know. As such, they exchanged an astonished glance with one another before cupping their fists in a salute toward Ling Yuling and also taking a seat. However, in response to this, Ling Yuling merely tucked a few stray strands of hair behind her ear as a cold light flashed through her eyes. Han Li was observing all of these minor details, and a hint of a smile appeared on her face. It was quite clear that this elder Ma wasn't content to serve this new master of the Star Palace, and Ling Yuling was using him to intimidate these elders and keep them in check. Han Li was feeling both rather amused and a little speechless. However, Ling Yuling was an old acquaintance of his, so he didn't take this to heart. After all, what she was doing wasn't causing harm to him in any way. Following the arrival of Elder Ma's trio, the rest of the Star Palace elders also began to arrive at the Sacred Palace one after the other. All of them were immediately given quite a surprise by the sight of the unfamiliar great cultivator present among their ranks. Even though none of these nascent soul stage elders could ascertain Han Li's true cultivation base, all of them turned to Elder Ma as a litmus test for Han Li's power, and all of them were quite stunned by what they saw. Before long, over 20 Star Palace elders had gathered in the hall. Aside from 3 mid-nascent soul cultivators, Elder Zhao, Elder Ma, and Ling Yuling, all of the rest were at the early nascent soul stage. Ling Yuling slowly rose to her feet and pointed at Han Li with a smile as she announced, "Seeing as everyone's here, let me introduce to you all an esteemed guest. This is the guest elder appointed by the former palace masters, Han Li." All of the elders present had naturally heard of Han Li before, and Ling Yuling's announcement created quite a stir among them, to the extent that one of them couldn't help but exclaim, "Han Li." Han Li turned toward the Star Palace elder who had spoken to find that it was a benevolent-looking white-robed elderly man. Han Li's eyes narrowed as a contemplative look appeared in his eyes. All of a sudden, a thought seemed to have occurred to him as his expression darkened. "It appears that we've met in the Heaven Void Hall before. I recall that there were 2 fellow Taoists responsible for opening the Heaven Void Hall back then. May I ask where he is?" Han Li's voice had become rather cold and unforgiving. Meanwhile, the white-robed elder's face had turned deathly pale. This man was none other than the Star Palace enforcement elder who had almost stabbed Han Li through the heart in the Heaven Void Hall. Back when he had just entered the hall, he had found Han Li to be rather familiar, but he failed to immediately identify him. However, Ling Yuling's introduction made him recall the memories of the events that had taken place in the Heaven Void Hall, and he naturally managed to identify Han Li. Ling Yuling could naturally glean the cold look in Han Li's eyes, and her heart sank in response, but she could only muster up her courage and ask, "Do you recognize Elder Ximen, Brother Han?" A series of emotions quickly flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he seemed to have arrived at some sort of decision as he reverted back to his normal calm expression, and replied, "I'm not very familiar with him. It's just that fellow Taoist Ximen had caused some trouble for me back when I hadn't reached the nascent soul stage." Ling Yuling was quite relieved that Han Li was making light of the matter, and she hurriedly changed the subject as she said, "I see. If Elder Ximen caused you any offense in the past, I hope you may forgive him, Brother Han. Let's get back to our discussion about Wan Tianming, shall we? After all, the top priority for our Star Palace is to eradicate the Starfall Coalition." The white-robed elder was also slightly relieved after hearing Han Li's words, but he was still unable to completely quell the fear in his heart. "I don't know what the late sages told you, fellow Taoist Ling, but the promise I made to them was that I would only step in if and when your life is under direct threat, and I'll do everything in my power to save you. I didn't promise them that I would fight for the Star Palace against a cultivator of the same cultivation base as mine to the death," Han Li said in a slow voice. His words were met with complete silence,